Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. What I'm about to tell you isn't a theory. It's not a rumor or some viral creepypasta meant to entertain insomniacs on Reddit. This is a confession from someone who was there. Someone who saw what they weren't supposed to. What they built. What it revealed. My name doesn't matter anymore. They scrubbed it clean, erased it like a typo. But the story, this story, still matters. It needs to be told before it's buried like everything else down there. They said it was a clearance upgrade, just a quiet promotion, a new desk, a new floor. Sounded routine, but it wasn't a promotion. It was the beginning of something. That cracked my mind open like an egg. The Nevada site didn't have a name, not officially. It floated in that strange limbo between acknowledgement and denial, where things exist, but no one will ever admit they do. There were no signs on the gate, no logos, no hint of what loomed behind the layers of razor wire, concrete barriers, and gunmetal silence. Just a number, posted on a lonely stake in the gravel. 8:47. I remember the heat that day, July 2011. The kind of heat that made the asphalt ripple like a mirage. I stepped out of my rental, sweat already gathering under my collar, and walked up to the checkpoint. The sun was a bully, pressing down hard. My dress shirt stuck to my back by the time I reached the guard station. Inside, the air was freezing, like they were refrigerating something they didn't want to decay. Everything was sterile, beige and white. The walls, the floor, even the ceiling tiles hummed with the steady groan of air conditioning fighting off the desert. The guards, they weren't like the ones I'd worked with before. Black uniforms, no patches, no names. Their speech was clipped, professional, with no hint of accent or background. They moved like they belonged in a place like this, like they'd never belonged anywhere else. I'd been with the NSA for 12 years, mostly signals intelligence, data mining, SIGINTOPS. But this felt different. The silence was thick here. Every glance seemed to linger a second too long, like they were sizing me up or trying to figure out what I already knew. Then I heard it. Dr. Matthews. I turned. A woman stepped out of an elevator I hadn't noticed, set flush against the wall like a hidden panel. She looked to be in her 50s, grey hair tightly pulled back into a bun, lab coat over civilian clothes. No ID badge, no lanyard, and not even a pen in the pocket. "I'm your orientation supervisor," she said, already turning. "Please follow me." We stepped into the elevator. She didn't press a button. The doors closed and we began to descend. The floor numbers on the panel ticked down, B1, B2, B3, but they didn't stop. B7, B9, B11. I stopped counting. Finally, the elevator hissed open. "Welcome to sub-level 12, she said, her voice echoing faintly in the corridor. This was where I'd be working. The hallway was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It stretched in both directions, lined with solid metal doors. No windows, no labels, just codes. SL.1247A, SL2103C, cold and cryptic. The lighting was different too, not the usual harsh fluorescence, but a soft amber glow. It reminded me of late afternoon sunlight, only we were 12 stories underground. We stopped in front of 1288B. She pressed her palm to a scanner, typed a code I couldn't see, and the door clicked open. "Your office," she said. Except it wasn't an office. Not really. It looked like a control room had fused with a secure archive. One wall was filled with monitors, powered off, but waiting. The opposite wall held rows of filing cabinets, each with bizarre locks I couldn't decipher. They were both mechanical and digital, gears turning behind glass panels, shifting patterns like puzzles, constantly solving and resolving themselves. In the center of the room sat a minimalist desk, just one terminal on it. The screen glowed softly blue, pulsing like it was breathing. "Your job title," she said, "is Non-Linear Pattern Analyst." She shut the door behind us. I heard the lock engage with a heavy click. "Your clearance has been upgraded to TSSCI," she continued, "with added compartmental access." She waited a beat, letting the weight of that settle. "You'll be working with data that requires special interpretation." I lowered myself into the chair. It adjusted automatically to my height and posture, like it had been expecting me. The screen blinked to life, already logged in. My credentials, apparently, were already accepted. I looked up at her. "What kind of data?" I asked. She hesitated. Just for a moment, but enough to notice. Her eyes studied me carefully, like she was gauging whether I was ready. "Temporal probability matrices," she said at last. "Event cascade analysis, what some might call predictive intelligence." "Like fortune telling?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," she said flatly. "Science. Very advanced science." She handed me a tablet. Its screen lit up with a directory, hundreds of documents, technical manuals, physics theory, something titled Looking Glass Protocol. "Your team will brief you tomorrow," she said. "You'll meet the others, and you'll see the source of the data you're analyzing." I scrolled through the documents. The classification markings were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Layers within layers, code names I didn't recognize. Orion, black glass. "For tonight," she said, "read everything, all of it, no exceptions." She stepped back toward the door, paused, and turned one last time. "Welcome to the project," she said. "Don't try to understand it all at once. Let the patterns find you." Then she was gone. The lock clicked again. I was alone. Just me. The hum of that blue terminal, and the weight of 1,000 secrets pressing in from the walls. She paused at the door, her hand resting lightly on the handle. "Oh, one more thing," she said, as if it were just an afterthought. "Some of the material you'll be exposed to may cause side effects, psychological ones, vivid dreams, disorientation, in rare cases, temporal displacement sensations. Occasionally," she hesitated for just a second, "prophetic experiences." I blinked. Prophetic. "If you experience anything unusual, anything that doesn't feel rooted in the present, report it immediately. We have protocols in place for that." And then she was gone, the door closing with that same dull, final click. I sat there alone, the room around me humming faintly with unseen machinery. A low, ever-present thrum that seemed to pulse through the floor, up into the soles of my feet. Above me, 12 floors of steel, rock and reinforced concrete pressed down like a tomb. The cold fluorescent silence buzzed in my ears. I picked up the tablet and began reading. It didn't take long, maybe 45 minutes, maybe less, before I understood exactly why those psychological protocols existed. This wasn't just data analysis. This wasn't just advanced forecasting. Project Looking Glass wasn't about predicting the future. It was about seeing it, literally. The documents used terms that felt more like science fiction than government briefings. Temporal mirror, quantum convergence lens, probability collapse event structures, and the classification markings. No familiar top secret or eyes only. Just symbols, geometric shapes I didn't recognize, nested triangles, spirals, shapes that seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision like they were meant to, be understood by something older than language. And then there was the device itself, the looking glass. It wasn't housed on sub-level 12. It was deeper, sub-level 15, accessed by a separate elevator with dual key card entry. 2 people required to activate it at once. Redundancy protocols in case someone tried to go rogue. The day they showed it to me, I expected something cold and sterile. Metal, tables, lab equipment, maybe a few servers humming away in the corner. What I stepped into felt more like a place of worship. The chamber was circular, maybe 50 feet across, with a vaulted dome that stretched so high I couldn't see where it ended. No lights overhead, just darkness swallowing everything above. The walls were covered in sleek panels that shimmered and moved when you weren't looking directly at them, like mercury trying to imitate metal. And in the center of the room, the device. 3 concentric rings, each about 20 feet in diameter, hovering 3 feet off the ground. They moved, slowly, deliberately, each ring spinning independently of the others in a pattern that seemed random at first, but felt like it wasn't. The outermost ring was dark, almost black, etched with strange symbols. Not letters, not numbers. Something else. Something that felt old. Like the kind of symbols you find carved into stone at sites no one remembers. Building. The middle ring was translucent, like flawless crystal or hyperpure glass. It pulsed with a light from inside itself. Colors that shimmered and changed constantly, many of them unnamed and unnameable. But it was the inner ring that made my skin crawl. It looked like liquid metal, like the wall panels, but even more alive. It shifted endlessly, reforming itself over and over, a surface that never stayed the same for more than a second. And in the exact center, suspended between that ring and the floor, was the sphere. It was about the size of a beach ball, pure obsidian, or what looked like obsidian, a perfect black mirror. It reflected everything and nothing. When I looked directly into it, I saw my face, distorted, multiplied, rippling like the surface of deep water. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw other things, places that didn't exist, people I didn't recognize, versions of myself that weren't me. Impressive, isn't it? A voice said softly beside me. I turned. Dr. Sarah Chen stood just to my left. She'd appeared silently, like the room had summoned her. Late 30s, calm eyes. She was introduced earlier as the project's lead physicist, although no one had mentioned her full title or background. Only later would I find out she'd been recruited from CERN's Temporal Mechanics Research Division, a division that, officially, didn't exist. How does it work? I asked, still staring at the sphere. She smiled, but it wasn't warm, more like someone watching a student about to learn a hard truth. It's complicated, she said. The rings generate a localized temporal field, a bubble essentially, where time flows differently, slower, or faster, or sideways. She stepped closer to the sphere, not touching, just observing. The sphere is the focal point, a convergence lens for collapsing quantum probability waves into observable patterns. It doesn't show us the future, it shows us the likely futures, the ones that have the highest statistical convergence. Probability, I said quietly. So it's not exact? No, she replied, but it's damn close. She led me up a narrow stairwell to an observation deck overlooking the chamber. From there, I could see several technicians moving with practiced precision, prepping for what she called an observation session. She pointed through the glass. 3 years ago, we predicted the Tohoku earthquake in Japan. Not just the quake, we had the magnitude, the coordinates, even the sequence of tsunami waves. Down to the minute. I looked at her. Are you saying 6 months ago, she cut in, we identified the exact compound where Bin Laden was hiding. She let that hang in the air. 2 weeks ago, we saw the financial cascade that would lead to the European debt crisis. Below, a figure in a white jumpsuit entered the chamber. They moved slowly, reverently, stepping onto a platform near the sphere. From this distance, I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. They knelt, placed both hands on a set of embedded pads in the floor near the device. Who operates it? I asked. Technicians. She shook her head. Remote viewers, she said. You mean psychics? I asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Call them what you want, she said. They have an innate sensitivity to temporal resonance. The device amplifies that, creates a kind of feedback loop between human perception and quantum probability. And the military's been using this, she nodded. For years, quietly, training people with natural precognitive abilities, monitoring them. Some don't last long. What happens to them? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared down through the glass at the operator below, whose hands were now trembling. They start seeing things they shouldn't, she said softly. Not just the future, other timelines, other versions of reality. Alternate dimensions? No, she said. Not quite. More like discarded drafts, realities that almost happened, things that might still happen if the probabilities shift. And then she looked at me, really looked at me. You need to understand, Dr. Matthews. This isn't a telescope, it's a mirror. It doesn't just show the future, it changes it. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The kind of cold that doesn't go away when you leave the room. And I knew then, I hadn't been promoted, I'd been recruited. Since the 1970s, Project Looking Glass had been the end result of decades of covert research, pieced together from whispers of forbidden physics, declassified fragments, and unsanctioned breakthroughs. The device itself stood at the center of a cold, echoing chamber, surrounded by catwalks and monitors. Thick, concentric rings, 3 in total, hovered, each one rotating independently, faster and faster now as the machine powered up. The innermost ring began to shimmer. Its colors rippled and bled into each other, hues shifting like oil on water. At the center, the black sphere, a perfectly smooth orb suspended by nothing, began to vibrate. It emitted a sound, not one you could hear exactly, but one you felt deep in your bones, like the memory of thunder or the hum of a jet engine through reinforced glass. It wasn't just noise, it was alive. Dr. Chen stood beside me, hands clasped behind her back, voice calm but strained. The operator focuses on a single question or moment in time, she said. The device amplifies their consciousness. It pushes their awareness beyond ordinary perception, into the quantum substrate, where all probabilities coexist. Looked over at the chamber. Inside, the operator sat in a high-backed chair, palms pressed to 2 curved sensors that glowed faintly blue. A soft tremor ran through their arms. Chen continued. The machine translates what they perceive, these quantum probability fields, into raw data. Then it's converted into matrices and cascade models that analysts like you can interpret. On the surrounding monitors, new data began to pour in, not video feeds or satellite imagery, but streams of math, complex relationships, unfamiliar symbols forming branching charts. It looked like a mix of weather maps and spider webs, but instead of predicting storms, they mapped the unfolding of potential futures. I recognized some of it. During orientation, they'd shown us crude examples, temporal probability matrices they called them. Watching one update in real time was unsettling. It was like seeing reality flicker, like waves collapsing into a single moment. I remember thinking, this is the most advanced forecasting system on Earth. I even bragged once over drinks that I was working on the ultimate intelligence game. What I didn't realize back then was that we weren't just predicting, we were witnessing. And what we were witnessing was the slow death of free will. The operator jolted upright suddenly. Their spine went rigid, fingers spread wide against the sensors. The rings spun even faster, now a blur of light and motion. The sphere pulsed. A low droning came from it, layered now, richer. Then, I swear, I saw something in it. In the reflections, flickers of fire. A city in flames, crowds marching with flags and signs. A sky torn open with lights that weren't stars or planes. They weren't anything I could name. And then, silence. The rings slowed, lazy again, the shimmer fading. The sphere went dark, matte black. The operator slumped in the chair, unconscious. Alarms didn't go off. They never did. This wasn't unexpected, but it was getting worse. Medics rushed in. I stepped back as they entered the chamber. Dr. Chen turned to me. Her face was pale, lips tight. "That was a convergence reading," she said softly. I blinked. "What's a convergence reading?" She didn't answer right away, just looked through the glass as the team checked the operator's vitals. "It's when all possible futures collapse into one inevitable outcome," she finally said. "We've been getting more of them lately, and they're all pointing to the same moment." I stared at her. "What moment? What's going to happen?" She looked down, thoughtful, then up at the monitors, which were now slowing, as if even the math was exhausted. "We don't know yet," she whispered. "But whatever. It's coming. And every model, every simulation, every convergence shows the same thing. We can't stop it." I remember the way that hit me. Not like fear, more like gravity. My job, from that day on, was simple in theory. Find the patterns. Each morning I received stacks of data, pages of output from looking glass sessions, temporal analysis reports, probability matrices, cascade event models. My task was to compare them to real-world news, political shifts, market behaviors, even climate data. I'd map these echoes, build feedback loops, and improve the device's accuracy over time. But this wasn't like any other kind of intelligence work I'd done. I wasn't following people or organizations. I was tracking reality itself, its contours, its weak points, its currents. How did a political decision ripple out across years? What events remained fixed, and which ones could we nudge? Within weeks, I saw it, what Dr. Chen had hinted at. Certain events appeared in every projection. Change the input variables all you want. Alter global events. Pull levers we thought mattered. And yet these points would always appear, like gravity wells in time. Nothing escaped their pull. One of the clearest examples, the 2008 financial collapse. We modeled everything, tweaked interest rates, removed key players from simulations, rewrote history with every economic theory known to man. But no matter what we changed, the collapse happened. Sometimes it began with the subprime housing market. Sometimes it started with derivatives or banking failures in Europe. But it always happened. The world economy always cracked in that year. Always staggered. One day I asked Dr. Richard Voss, our resident quantum systems theorist, how that was possible. He gave a tired smile and said, "It's not that we can't change the future. It's that some futures are anchored, like knots in the timeline. The more you pull, the tighter they get." My supervisor, Dr. Voss, was a 20-year veteran of what he liked to call unconventional intelligence operations. He spoke in metaphors that stuck with you. "It's not that the future is fixed," he told me one evening in his dim, paper-strewn office on sublevel 13. "It's that some parts of it are already set. Like concrete, some futures are still wet, malleable, but some, they've already hardened." We were reviewing the latest batch of convergence readings. The printouts were spread across his desk, overlapping like a nervous gambler's losing hand. For months, we'd seen wide temporal spreads, multiple futures spiraling off in different directions. Now, they were narrowing, sharpening. I pointed to the temporal markers. "Look at this. Every path is collapsing into a tight focus, 2012 to 2016. It's like everything leads there." "Not everything," Dr. Voss replied, flipping through the pages. "One thing, one specific event. Every matrix points to it. Unavoidable. The question is, what the hell is it?" The early data had been vague. Phrases like consciousness shift, information cascade, and paradigm collapse kept coming up. Cryptic terms, difficult to interpret. But as 2011 faded into 2012, the patterns grew clearer and far more unsettling. Mass protests, widespread government instability, the breakdown of centralized media, a surge in decentralized networks, anonymous information leaks, economic models pushed past their breaking point, and running beneath it all, something more abstract, more profound. Remote viewers kept mentioning it. An awakening, Not a rebellion, not a war, something subtler and deeper. I remember writing, in my classified journal at the time, they don't fear violence, they fear awareness. They fear something we can't stop. What disturbed the brass wasn't just the predictions themselves, it was how accurate they were proving to be. The Arab Spring exploded in early 2011, lining up almost exactly with the social fracture timelines we'd modelled back in 2009. The Occupy movement, WikiLeaks, the emergence of Anonymous. All events the Looking Glass system had identified long before they became headlines. We hadn't believed it then. We thought they were possibilities. Now they looked more like inevitabilities. And when we tried to intervene, we failed. We ran hundreds of models, interventions, countermeasures, remove key figures, suppress leaks, launch distractions, even stage fabricated events to shift public focus. None of it made a difference. The probability matrices remained the same. It's like trying to change the past, Dr. Chen said during a technical briefing. From the perspective of the quantum field, these things already happened. We're not predicting the future, we're observing it. By mid-2012, we'd stopped treating Looking Glass data as speculative. It had become intelligence from the future. Operators would emerge from sessions with granular details about events that hadn't happened yet. Locations, names, even timestamps. And weeks or months later, those details would match actual reports to a frightening degree. One session changed everything. The operator was Patricia Wells, a former CIA remote viewer with a reputation for precision and calm. That day, her session ran longer than usual. Her vitals spiked. Heart rate, brain activity, especially in the temporal lobe and the default mode network. Readings we usually only saw in near-death experiences or in advanced meditative states. When she finally came out, she was crying, trembling. "What did you see?" I asked. She wiped her eyes, still breathing hard. "The moment the sleepers wake up," she whispered. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," she said, voice breaking. "But it's beautiful. It's terrible and beautiful, and nothing will ever be the same." Her readings weren't just emotional, they were neurological anomalies, patterns we'd never recorded, and they led us to a realization we hadn't dared consider before. Consciousness was part of the equation. The device wasn't only revealing geopolitical shifts or economic collapses, it was mapping a transformation in human awareness. Something fundamental, something evolutionary. Dr. Voss brought in a team from the government's most obscure and protected programs, neuroscientists from old black projects like Grillflame and Stargate, quantum theorists who specialized in the interaction between consciousness and subatomic probabilities, even philosophers, people who had spent decades studying the nature of time and free will. For once, they all agreed. The convergence we were tracking wasn't just political, it wasn't just social or economic. It was internal. A phase transition. Human consciousness itself, collective awareness, was accelerating towards some critical threshold, something irreversible. Like ice reaching the point, it becomes water, or water becoming steam, and we were standing at the edge of it, watching it come, watching it happen in slow motion, unable to stop it. "Think of it like water turning into steam," said Dr. Margaret Torres. Her voice was calm, measured. Too calm, maybe, for what she was actually saying. She was a quantum consciousness researcher, someone brought in from a black budget program so deeply classified I wasn't even allowed to know its name. Below, the boiling point, water is just water. But once it crosses that threshold, it changes, becomes something else entirely, with new properties, new behavior. She glanced around the room, then back down at the pages spread across the conference table. Hundreds of them. Charts, graphs, dense probability matrices, all pointing to one thing. "Consciousness," she said, "seems to be going through a similar transition, and we can't stop it." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "You can't stop water from boiling if you keep adding heat," she said. "And in this case, the heat is information. The explosion of communication, data processing, artificial intelligence, social networks. It's all pushing our collective awareness higher and higher. At some point, the system hits a threshold, and then she paused, her voice dropping. Then we find out what steam looks like when it's made of human awareness. The room went quiet. I looked back down at the data. She wasn't exaggerating. The models had been narrowing for months. Where we once had sprawling futures, dozens, sometimes hundreds of divergent outcomes, they had begun to collapse into a single, unified timeline, not over decades, but in months, weeks. That's when it hit me. We weren't forecasting the future anymore. We were witnessing it solidify, harden, like concrete drying before our eyes. It was terrifying, because if the convergence was real, then everything we thought we understood, planning, strategy, control, meant nothing. Institutions, governments, the so-called architects of civilization, they weren't shaping anything. They were just watching inevitability roll toward them. And yet, that wasn't the worst part. As the year 2012 progressed, the convergence became more intense, sharper. Then, something new began to show up in the data, an anomaly that made us question everything. The device, the one we'd used to observe potential futures, was showing signs it wasn't just watching. Something was watching back. It started subtly. Operators began experiencing strange sensations during sessions, feeling seen, like a presence was on the other side of the observation. Feedback loops became more erratic. We began detecting patterns, ones we hadn't input. In October 2012, Dr. Elena Vasquez joined our team. She was pulled in from a program so deeply buried in classified physics and consciousness studies, it officially didn't exist. Her first day, she looked at the most recent convergence plots and turned, pale. "How long have you been seeing single-path projections?" she asked. Dr. Voss replied without hesitation. "About 8 months. Why?" "Because that shouldn't be possible," she said, laying the sheets out again. Quantum fields operate on superposition. Multiple outcomes coexist until collapse. If you're seeing one fixed outcome across different operators and sessions, that suggests collapse has already happened. We stared at her. She tapped the focal point, repeated again and again across different sessions. "You're not watching the future crystallize. This is the past reaching forward. Something already happened, and it's pulling every probability thread toward itself." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense. The future can't affect the past." "Not in classical physics," she said, lips pressed thin. "But consciousness isn't classical. If a future event becomes conscious enough, aware enough, it could observe the past. And just like quantum observation collapses possibilities in the present, maybe awareness can collapse them backwards." It was a horrifying idea, but it explained something none of us could. For months, our intervention strategies, everything we tried to do to shift outcomes, had failed, not because we lacked insight, but because the outcome was already embedded into the structure of reality. We weren't trying to prevent something from happening. We were trying to rewrite a story that had already been told. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Chen brought in more experts. Among them was Dr. James Hartwell, a physicist known for working on edge-case theoretical models involving time symmetry and observer effects. When he saw our data, his face drained of color. He didn't even ask what it meant. He just said, "Shut it down," and eventually, we did. Project Looking Glass was disbanded. The team scattered, records deleted, terminals wiped. But sometimes, late at night, I can't help but wonder if the future is already watching. What does it see in us now? He'd worked on temporal mechanics at a classified facility in Colorado, one that, according to him, studied events that hadn't even happened yet. When Dr. James Hartwell reviewed our data, his conclusion was somehow even more unsettling than Dr. Vasquez's. "You're looking at a temporal locked loop," he said, scanning through weeks of convergence readouts. He tapped his finger against a focal point on the screen. It's a causal structure where the effect precedes the cause. Something between 2012 and 2016, something conscious, is influencing the conditions that lead to its own emergence. I blinked. Are you saying the future is controlling the past? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back, took a breath, and said, I'm saying that consciousness might be temporal in ways we still don't understand. If it evolves enough, if awareness becomes sufficiently refined, it might gain the ability to perceive not just through space, but through time. And if perception affects reality, like quantum mechanics tells us, then observation from the future could collapse probability states in the past. The room went dead silent. We stared at the data, not really seeing it, just feeling the weight of what he'd said. We weren't just watching human consciousness evolve. We were watching it become something potent enough to alter the structure of causality itself. By early 2013, the data got worse. The convergence wasn't just a 4-year window anymore. It had become a specific sequence of events, tight, consistent, repeating across every model we ran, a cascade, like dominoes already falling. And whatever it was going to fundamentally reshape civilization. Our remote viewing team began to experience strange side effects. Patricia Wells, our most skilled operator, started reporting what she called temporal bleeding, flashbacks to things that hadn't happened yet, nightmares that bled into her waking hours, moments when she couldn't tell which version of reality she was living in. It's getting stronger, she told me after one particularly disturbing session. She looked pale, drained, like she hadn't slept in days. Whatever this is, it's pulling at us, drawing us forward. Sometimes I feel like I'm already there, like I'm standing in the future, looking back at this exact moment, wondering how we could have been so blind. The data she began producing didn't look like normal reports. It was no longer just matrices or projections. It read like personal testimony, first-person narratives of things that hadn't happened yet, full, vivid descriptions of a world that felt familiar, but fundamentally changed. During debriefs, she spoke in a voice that sometimes didn't sound like her own. The old systems won't work anymore, she said one afternoon, her eyes glassy, her tone detached. Money, government, religion, media, they'll still exist, but they won't mean the same things. People will see through them, around them, beyond them. It'll be like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were having. Dr. Voss grew increasingly alarmed. Our original protocols had assumed that exposure to future data would be limited, contained. Instead, the convergence was forcing longer sessions, deeper dives into probability fields, and more immersive observation. The boundaries between viewer and data were dissolving. We're losing objectivity, Voss warned during a classified briefing with command. The data's changing the analysts. It's not just information, it's influence. We're being affected, molded. That didn't go over well. The military had funded Project Looking Glass to gain an edge, to outmaneuver geopolitical rivals, predict black swan events, and secure American dominance. Instead, what we were giving them was a forecast of collapse. General Morrison, the project's liaison to the Department of Defense, stared across the table with a hard expression. You're telling us, he said slowly, that this convergence, this evolution, will render conventional governance ineffective. Not ineffective, Dr. Chen corrected. Just irrelevant. If human consciousness evolves the way the data suggests people will develop a kind of perceptual immunity, they'll start seeing through the systems we rely on. Propaganda, artificial scarcity, manufactured division. The structures that depend on people not knowing the full picture will start to break down. The silence that followed was suffocating. These were men and women who had built their careers on control, controlling narratives, controlling information, controlling populations, and now we were telling them that something was coming. Something they couldn't manipulate or contain. Something that might already be here. The idea that our systems, our governments, our institutions, our carefully constructed hierarchies, could simply become obsolete. That was more terrifying to the people in that room than any foreign enemy ever could be. We were staring at something no weapon could stop, no policy could delay. Dr. Voss sat silently, staring down at the convergence. Charts we'd been poring over for months, red lines, thickening paths of probability, once branching and chaotic, had now narrowed into something brutal and singular. Certainty. We've tried everything, he muttered. Economic manipulation, coordinated media narratives, strategic suppression of emerging tech. We even resorted to eliminating individuals deemed critical to potential divergence, but the probabilities won't budge. His voice was flat, tired. The room, dimly lit by the glow of the displays, fell into a tense silence. No one moved. The hum of the ventilation system felt louder than usual. This isn't something we can stop with conventional tools, he added, softer now, like admitting it hurt. So what do you recommend? Someone asked. I think it was Colonel Mason. His voice cracked halfway through the question. Silence again. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched wide and empty, the sand a dull gold under a sky that revealed none of the secrets buried in the bunkers beneath it. Inside, everything felt still and stifled. Adaptation, Dr. Chen finally said, her voice barely audible. If this future is locked in, then we have no choice but to prepare for it. Understand what's coming. Find ways to maintain stability as we cross into whatever this is. I looked at her. I think we all did. She sounded rational, steady. But there was fear behind her eyes, deep and gnawing. Because we all knew the truth. The convergence readings weren't forecasting a transition. They were forecasting an end. By 2014, Project Looking Glass had drifted far from its original purpose. It was no longer a tool for strategic forecasting. It had become a mirror showing the decay of the very power that built it. The data didn't lie. We were entering a phase of global transformation so vast, so unpredictable, that our systems couldn't cope. Economic models failed to stabilize projections. Political unrest spiked in ways no amount of psychological operations or narrative control could quell. Grassroots movements formed like lightning. No leaders, no funding trails, no origin points to trace. Just people, rising. Most disturbing of all, the readings began to suggest something deeper, a shift in consciousness itself. Human awareness, evolving, people becoming more connected, not through technology, but through something else, something unseen. They were waking up, seeing past the illusion. Patricia Wells came out of a deep session one day, remote viewing, sensory data absorption, and she looked pale, shaken. It's not just that they'll know the truth, she said, still trembling. They'll be capable of knowing it. Their minds, our minds, are going to change. Deception won't just be harder, it'll be impossible. The room went cold. You could feel it settle into your spine. A world without lies, no disinformation, no propaganda, no tools left to steer people with fear or division. The entire system of control would collapse, not because of revolt, but because it would become irrelevant. Governance, at least as we knew it, wouldn't be possible anymore. Then Dr. Vasquez presented something worse. She brought in newer data. AI progression curves, consciousness simulation outputs, quantum entanglement feedback from deep learning nodes. She stood in front of us and said something I'll never forget. The singularity you've been fearing, the one with artificial intelligence, it's the same event as this shift in human consciousness. We didn't understand at first. So, she explained, at the moment AI reaches parity with human awareness breaks past its own ceiling. They meet halfway, and what comes out of that isn't either of them. It's something entirely new. We stared at her. Some of us laughed, nervously, but she wasn't joking. I'm not theorizing, she added. Look, she pulled up the latest probability matrices, No branches, no forks, no deviations, just a single line, straight, unstoppable. "This isn't going to happen," she said, eyes locking with mine. "From space-time's perspective, it already has. We're just playing out the steps." The generals didn't like that. Their solution: containment, control. If we couldn't stop the convergence, maybe we could shape it. Task forces were formed, surveillance intensified. They identified people, young, old, artists, coders, teachers, anyone flagged as a potential node in the coming shift. They monitored them, intervened when necessary, quietly, carefully. Contingency plans were drafted, military assets were repositioned, critical infrastructure was isolated and hardened. We stockpiled supplies, rehearsed continuity of government, protocols in case entire systems failed. And they did fail. The plans didn't work. The people they tried to silence only grew louder. The more control they applied, the faster the shift accelerated. It was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with your hands, and deep down, even the brass knew. This wasn't just the end of an era, it was the end of control itself. The convergence readings were becoming more terrifying by the day. Every intervention, we tried, every countermeasure, contingency, failsafe, collapsed under the sheer scale of what we were facing. The mechanisms of control we'd spent decades refining were dissolving, made useless by something far beyond them. "It's like trying to stop an earthquake by rearranging the furniture," Dr. Chen muttered one evening as we sat in the dim glow of the planning room. Her voice was hoarse, exhausted. The forces at play here, they're not political or technological. They're something much bigger. We're trying to redirect a tidal wave with a spoon. By late 2014, something happened that no protocol could account for. Our people began to disappear. It started with Patricia Wells. She came in that Monday, like any other day, logged in, ran a routine convergence scan. She didn't seem distressed or shaken. If anything, she was unusually calm. Then she left for the day, walking out to the parking lot like normal. The security footage showed her heading toward her car, but the car never moved. When security checked later, they found it still in the lot. Locked. Keys in the ignition. Her badge was inside, along with her phone and purse. But Patricia? Gone. Not missing in the usual sense. No sign of abduction, no struggle, no leads. "She wasn't taken," Dr. Vasquez said the next day, almost in a whisper. "She moved. Or was moved. Displaced." We stared at her, unsure if she was serious. "Temporal displacement," she explained. "Extended exposure to convergence. Data may be destabilizing their temporal anchors. If the human mind becomes attuned to future consciousness, it might begin to slip into other points in time. They're not vanishing. They're returning to where, or when, they belong." 2 weeks later, Dr. Chen didn't show up. We called her phone. No answer. Went to her apartment. Nothing out of place. Her bed was made, breakfast dishes in, the sink, lights off, door locked from the inside. It was like she'd never been there. Her car was still parked at the facility. Her accounts hadn't been touched. No calls, no emails, no trace. Then it started happening more often. Quietly, subtly. Remote viewers, theoretical physicists, cognitive scientists, anyone deeply embedded in convergence analysis began to vanish. Not all at once. One by one. No bodies, no wreckage, no evidence. Just gone. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise, clean, as if the future had begun calling its architects home. By December, the project was unraveling. General Morrison summoned the remaining staff, less than half the original team, to the main conference room. The atmosphere was grim. Some looked scared. Others just looked numb. "Effective immediately," he announced. "Project Looking Glass is terminated. All research materials will be secured. All equipment deactivated. Personnel reassigned." "But we're so close," Dr. Voss argued. His voice cracked slightly. "The convergence is accelerating. We're within 2 years of the focal point. Don't you want to understand what's coming? The general's face didn't change. His jaw clenched. We know enough, he said coldly. This project is now a risk to national security. We cannot allow our people to keep disappearing into some theoretical future. It took 3 weeks to shut it all down. We dismantled the machine piece by piece, each component labeled and shipped to separate black sites across the country. The quantum resonance chamber, where the readings had been most intense, was sealed with thick lead panels, entombed in concrete, and buried beneath 50 feet of Nevada sand. We shredded documents, fragmented databases, scrubbed drives, classified, everything, but some of us suspected, maybe knew, it was too late. The convergence had already bled out. The information we'd uncovered wasn't something that could be locked away. It wanted to be known, and it would find ways to spread through dreams, symbols, intuition, through people. On my last day at Sublevel 12, I was cleaning out my desk when I found something strange. A folded note tucked into the back of one of my classified journals. My name was on the envelope. The handwriting, it was Patricia's. But I'd never seen her write this. Not here. Not anywhere. The machine didn't. Just observe the future. It connected to it. And now it's pulling us home. Don't resist. You'll know when it's time. I stared at it for a long time. The words didn't make sense, but something about them felt true. I still have that note. I've moved 6 times since then. Changed my name twice. Dropped off the grid as best I could. Took a low-profile job in civilian intelligence. Nothing classified, nothing risky. Officially, I'd worked on defense logistics modeling. My clearance was downgraded. My NDA updated, re-signed. I was relocated to a nondescript facility in Virginia to work on signal traffic analysis. Just rows of blinking screens, late hours, and endless reports. But sometimes, late at night when everything's quiet, I feel it. A pressure, a pull, not painful, not frightening. More like a whisper from just beyond hearing. A feeling in my bones, in my chest. A sense that something is waiting. That something is coming. Or maybe it already has. A future I glimpsed without understanding. A place I somehow remember without ever having been. And in those moments, I finally understand what Patricia meant. You don't see what I saw and just go back to normal. You can't unknow the future. The first few months were brutal. I'd wake up expecting to see rows of probability matrices again, convergence charts lighting up, infinite streams of real-time data coming from a machine that, at least officially, no longer existed, buried beneath miles of sand and cement in the Nevada desert. Instead, I found myself staring at satellite images of missile silos and intercepted chatter between diplomats and warlords. Mundane, human, fragile, all of it meaningless in the shadow of what I knew was coming. It felt like being asked to study the social habits of ants while watching someone raise a boot over the entire colony. These daily intelligence briefings on foreign governments, sleeper cells, military operations. What did any of it matter if human consciousness itself was already shifting into something that no longer needed governments or militaries? I tried to keep my head down. I really did. But I couldn't stop thinking in patterns. I'd catch myself analyzing traffic jams the way I used to analyze timeline deviations. I'd stare at economic data or election polls and feel the chill of déjà vu crawling up my spine. It was happening again, exactly as the convergence readings had said it would. Not just in general trends, but down to the timing, the language, even the facial expressions of certain key figures. Social movements emerged right on cue, like actors hitting their marks. The markets reacted in neat, cascading waves, each one echoing what our models had shown. But 2016, that was the turning point. The election. Every beat of it felt preordained. The primaries, the scandals, the sudden leaks, foreign manipulation, the exact electoral map. It was like sitting inside a theatre, watching a movie I already knew by heart. But this time, I was in the film, playing a part I didn't remember auditioning for. And then people started acting differently. That was the part that really disturbed me. It wasn't just that the world was unfolding like a well-rehearsed play. It was the audience. They weren't watching passively anymore. They were questioning everything. Propaganda that used to work like clockwork suddenly fell flat. Politicians would speak, and their words were pulled apart in real time, examined, mocked, exposed. Whole communities began organizing themselves without clear leaders. Memes became more effective than government briefings. Strangers connected across borders, ideologies, time zones. United not by cause, but by pattern recognition. Something was shifting. The evolution Patricia Wells warned us about. It had begun. I started keeping a personal journal. I knew I couldn't bring this up during debriefings or official meetings. Too risky, but I had to document it somehow. I logged everything. Moments of shared insight between people who'd never met. Media narratives collapsing under the weight of collective skepticism. Markets that seemed to correct themselves based on intuitive hunches rather than analyst reports. Even dreams. People began dreaming things before they happened. Not always clearly, but enough to notice. Enough to unsettle. The old systems won't work anymore, Patricia had said. I remember her voice so clearly now. Calm, resigned. People will see through them, around them, beyond them. By 2018, I understood what she meant. It wasn't some apocalyptic rupture. There were no thunderclaps or alien landings. It felt more like dawn breaking, slow, almost invisible. And then, suddenly, it was full daylight, and you couldn't even remember what darkness looked like. That's when I started seeing it. The symbols, the same geometric patterns that lined the perimeter of the looking glass device. Spirals, intersecting triangles, glyphs with no known origin, started popping up in the strangest places. Spray painted on overpasses in Berlin, etched into sidewalk, tiles in Tokyo, hidden in the background design of a soda commercial. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I dug deeper. The artists didn't know where the designs came from. They'd sketch them in notebooks, carve them into wood, code them into generative software, always with the same explanation. It just came to me. They said they felt the symbols before they drew them, that they had to get them out like some compulsion buried beneath conscious thought. The more I looked, the more I found. Fringe conspiracy forums buzzing with whispers of Project Looking Glass, academic papers on entangled cognition, quantum consciousness, precognitive states, all referencing, however obliquely, the same principles we'd worked on. Even theoretical physics journals, masked under heavy jargon, hinted at the same impossible truths. That observation shapes reality, and that some future events have already happened because they are being watched. And the most terrifying part? None of them were wrong. I dreamed about it for weeks, one street artist in Detroit told me. I'd tracked him down after seeing his mural, a sprawling, intricate pattern sprayed across a crumbling brick wall near an abandoned train station. It was exact, not similar, exact. The same symbol etched into the outer ring of the looking. Glass device. Symbols that were locked in vaults buried under the Nevada desert, officially classified beyond top secret in programs that technically didn't exist. I kept seeing it, the artist said, rubbing the back of his neck like the memory still itched, in my sleep, over and over. The shape, the pattern. I had to paint it. I couldn't not paint it. That stuck with me. I had to paint it. Like something had wormed its way into his mind and wouldn't let go until it was released. But that was the thing, wasn't it? The convergence readings had already warned us. Information wants to be free, not in a political sense, not even a technological one. In a deeper, almost biological way, as if reality itself was trying to express something through us. By 2019, I began experiencing what Patricia Wells once called temporal bleeding. At the time, it sounded like sci-fi jargon, Now I knew better. It started with the dreams. They weren't dreams, not really. They felt more vivid than memory, like I was reliving things that hadn't happened yet. I'd wake up disoriented, feeling like I'd just returned from somewhere else, but with no words to describe where. Then came the déjà vu, not the fleeting kind. This lasted for hours. Conversations that looped, encounters with strangers who acted like old friends. They'd say things like, "We talked about this already," or "Didn't I already tell you that?" only to blankly deny it moments later. Sometimes they'd look at me like they knew me, deeply, intimately, but had no idea from where. Then the phone calls started, late at night, always from numbers that didn't exist when I tried to call them back. The voices were familiar. Patricia Wells, Dr. Chen, occasionally others I didn't recognize, yet somehow they knew me. "It's starting," they'd whisper. "Can you feel it? The old world is dissolving. The new one is almost here." I'd hang up, check my call logs, find nothing, no record of a call, no evidence of connection. But the words wouldn't leave me. They stuck like residue, echoing in my head for days, weeks, until they began to feel more real than the briefings, more true than the reports I filed. By 2020, the convergence was no longer theoretical. You could see it in the world: the pandemic, the economic breakdowns, the waves of social upheaval. Each one mirrored the patterns we'd observed in the looking glass data. It wasn't just the events, it was how people responded. Entire communities reorganized themselves without instruction. Grassroots networks outpaced federal relief. Information flooded the internet in chaotic, unfiltered torrents, faster than governments could censor or control. And yet, somehow, clarity began to emerge from that chaos. People were connecting, really connecting, across all the old boundaries. Language, nation, religion, all of it started to blur. The structures that had defined human civilization for centuries, hierarchies, top-down control, enforced order, began to rot from the inside out. I saw it happening, every day. From my desk in Virginia, writing up routine intel reports on insurgent activity and trade routes while reality shifted beneath my fingertips. The irony became unbearable. I was one of the few people who understood what was really happening. And I was stuck in a machine that refused to acknowledge it. Then, in December 2020, a package arrived. No return address, no markings, just a small envelope containing a single, folded sheet of paper, coordinates, somewhere in Nevada. A date, December 21st, 2020, the winter solstice. I stared at it for hours. The handwriting was mine, but I hadn't written it. I told my supervisor I needed leave, personal reasons. He didn't argue. I think he was relieved. I'd been difficult, all lately, asking questions that veered off script, pursuing data trails that led nowhere anyone wanted me to go. The coordinates pointed to a barren stretch of desert, roughly 40 miles from the original Looking Glass facility. I drove there in a rental car, alone, the desert unfolding in every direction, miles of dust and silence under a sky so clear it felt like glass. I arrived just before sunset. There was nothing. No buildings, no roads, not even tire tracks. Just a single metal post, what looked like an old surveyor's marker jutting out of the hard-packed earth. I stood there, watching the sun dip behind the mountains, casting the desert in long shadows. That's when I felt it. A presence. Not loud, not sudden, just there. Like a memory sharpening into focus, they emerged from the shadows like ghosts solidifying, one by one. Patricia Wells, Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez, the others, the remote viewers, the physicists, the researchers who had, all vanished without a trace during the final phase of Project Looking Glass. I hadn't seen them in years, and yet they looked exactly as I remembered. Not older, not changed, like time hadn't touched them. You felt it too, Patricia said as I stepped forward. Her voice was soft, detached, like it was echoing from someplace far away. The pull, the call to come home. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. Finally, I asked, "Where have you been?" "When?" Dr. Chen corrected gently, smiling faintly. "We've been when we belong." He looked out toward the horizon, where the last of the light was fading. "In the convergence point," he continued, looking back at the time when none of us understood what we were really seeing. Then, the surveyor's marker began to glow, a soft, pulsing light, familiar, resonant, and I knew, without a doubt, that the threshold had opened. The same amber glow, subtle, warm, and unnatural, spread across the desert floor, exactly as I remembered from sub-level 12. But this time, it wasn't inside a lab. It was here, in the open, beneath the sand. The ground began to shift. At first, it was just a soft tremble. Then the grains of sand started sliding, forming patterns like ripples in water. Something beneath was pushing upward, slowly revealing the outline of an object long buried. "The device was never really destroyed," Dr. Vasquez said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. I turned to her. "But we scattered its components. We shut it down. She shook her head. "How do you destroy something that exists outside of linear time?" Her voice was steady, calm. "Sure, the physical parts were dismantled, but the quantum resonance field? That didn't go anywhere. It became part of us, part of everyone who worked with it." As she spoke, the object rose fully into view, but it wasn't the massive chamber I remembered. This was smaller, compact, elegant almost. A single ring 6 feet in diameter, floating just above the sand. It spun slowly, and as it turned, it cast impossible shadows and strange patterns of light. They reached farther than they should have, bending across space, distorting the air around us. Patricia stepped forward, her voice distant but clear. "This is what it was always meant to become. Not a machine controlled by human minds, but human consciousness becoming the machine." I stared at her. "You're saying we were part of it from the beginning?" "We were never separate," she said softly. "We were always one system, one field of awareness, a single quantum structure trying to understand itself. And in that moment, I understood why I'd come back, why all of us had, not out of nostalgia or duty, but because we were being drawn, pulled by something deeper. The convergence point wasn't a date on a calendar. It was this, right now, a moment when all the old walls between the observer and the observed, between self and reality, began to fall away. "The future we saw," I whispered. "It's happening now." Dr. Chen, who had been silent until now, nodded. "It's always been happening. Time isn't linear. That's just how we perceive it, through a narrow filter. But at the quantum level, all moments exist at once, every possibility, every path." The ring spun faster. Light shimmered across its surface like liquid glass. I saw the matrices again, the same ones we used to obsess over at Looking Glass, but they no longer looked like predictions or probabilities. They looked like maps, maps of consciousness, of awareness navigating a sea of possibility. "What happens now?" I asked, barely able to hear myself over the hum in the air. Patricia turned to me. For the first time since her disappearance, she looked real, fully present, no flicker of uncertainty, no mental distance. She smiled. "Now you choose." "Choose what?" "You can go back, pretend none of this matters. Sit at your desk, write your reports, let the old world fade around you. Or," she paused, letting the word hang in the air, "or you step into the new one. Help others understand. Help them prepare. Be the bridge between what was and what's coming." The ring pulsed, and for a brief moment, I saw the world we'd glimpsed in data streams and simulations, but not as code, as experience. A world where consciousness had evolved, where secrecy had become obsolete, where honesty was default, where manipulation couldn't exist because everyone could see truth as it was. Not a perfect world, not utopia. There were still hardships, still learning, still loss. But people faced those things without fear, without illusion. They faced them together. It was overwhelming. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. And it was real. I stepped forward. Crossing into the ring felt ordinary. No bright flash. No dramatic rush. No sudden sense of being pulled through time. One moment I was standing on hot sand, surrounded by people I used to work beside. The next, I was somewhere else. What here means, I don't know how to explain. Time doesn't work the same. Moments bleed into each other. The past, the future, they're just directions now, like east or west. I can still see my life at Looking Glass, still feel every hour of those long shifts, every diagram, every late-night breakthrough. And I can see the world that rose from this moment, the one we built after the convergence. But I'm speaking to you from your time now, from your frame of reference, because someone still needs to build the bridge. There are still people living under the old rules, believing in linear time, in isolated selves, in the need for systems to control and define everything. You don't have to believe me. This isn't about belief. The convergence doesn't depend on faith or agreement. It depends on awareness, on consciousness itself evolving. And that's already happening, whether anyone is ready or not. But understanding, real understanding, helps. It softens the fear. It eases the shock. And you need to know what's coming. Not to prepare in the old sense of the word, but to stop resisting what's already unfolding around you. The changes you're seeing, the political chaos, the economic collapses, the decay of institutions that once seemed unshakable, none of it is random. It's not just bad luck or poor leadership. It's the outer expression of something deeper. The shift in human consciousness we observed back at Project Looking Glass. The old systems were built on keeping people unaware, distracted, divided. Those systems only work when people can't see the full picture. But as more and more minds begin to wake up, to sense that there's more than what they've been told, those systems can't hold. They're crumbling under the weight of collective awareness. And here's the thing that matters most. You're not powerless in this. Far from it. Our convergence readings showed it again and again. Individual consciousness plays a vital role in how this transition unfolds. Every single person who begins to perceive beyond the old boundaries, beyond the programming of culture, fear, and linear thinking, helps accelerate the shift. One awakened mind doesn't just change itself, it makes the path easier for others. You don't need to be a scientist or a psychic. You don't need clearance or credentials. You just need to pay attention, because the future isn't a distant maybe anymore. It's already here, layered beneath this present moment like a second skin of reality, waiting for people to notice it. The skills our remote viewers developed, seeing, through time, sensing across distances, those aren't supernatural gifts. They're dormant abilities in all of us. They awaken naturally as consciousness evolves. And I know how that sounds. Believe me, 5 years ago, I would have rolled my eyes at every word of this. I'd have dismissed it as delusion. Paranoia brewed from too many late nights in government archives reading redacted documents about black budget projects and impossible tech. But I saw the data. I watched the matrices collapse, not into chaos, but into clarity. I live the future, not through theory or simulation, but directly through experience. And I'm seeing signs now that it's beginning to happen for others. Maybe you've seen them too. Symbols, strange ones, showing up in unexpected places. Recurring dreams that feel more real than your waking life. Moments of connection with strangers that are too exact, too deep to be chance. That creeping sense that the official explanations for world events don't line up with what your instincts are telling you. These aren't coincidences. They're not glitches. They're signs, symptoms of consciousness evolution. Evidence that the illusion of separation between your mind and the greater field of awareness is dissolving. And if this is happening to you, if you're seeing patterns no one else acknowledges, or feeling truths you can't quite explain, you're not broken. You're not going crazy. You're becoming more sane than this world has ever allowed you to be. At Looking Glass, we discovered something that changed everything. The convergence can't be stopped. It's already in motion. But it can be understood, and that one fact makes all the difference. Understanding is what separates fear from awe, resistance from surrender. It's the difference between being dragged into the future blindfolded or stepping into it with your eyes wide open. That's why I'm telling you this now, because the old world is ending and a new one is already beginning to break through. There are still people, maybe you, who need to know they're not alone in witnessing this shift. You're not the only one who feels like something enormous is happening just beneath the surface. All those classified programs, the remote viewers, the underground facilities, they were never the point. They were just the prologue. The real story, the one that matters, is happening to you right now, because the device didn't just let us see the future. It formed a link to it. And that link is spreading, quietly, naturally, person to person, thought to thought, through the network of human consciousness itself. You might have noticed subtle changes in your life lately, small things, easy to dismiss, strange synchronicities, events lining up in ways too precise to be chance, dreams that contain knowledge you couldn't possibly have, fleeting moments of clarity where you just know something, deep in your gut, even if you can't explain why. Moments when reality feels thinner, more transparent, when something invisible seems to pass through the room. These aren't hallucinations. They're signals. Proof that your consciousness is beginning to access the same quantum field that powered Project Looking Glass. The same field that allowed us to perceive not just possible futures, but the inner architecture of awareness itself. The remote viewers weren't chosen because they were genetically special. They didn't have divine gifts. They were simply people who let go of the boundaries that most of us have been taught to accept without question. And what we learned from them is this. Those boundaries, those walls between instinct and logic, between the seen and the unseen, they're not real. They're learned, which means they can be unlearned. Every time you trust your intuition over a headline, every time you follow a hunch that makes no rational sense but turns out to be right, every time you sense meaning in a dream or connection in a moment of silence, you're breaking those old rules. You're remembering what your consciousness is capable of. You're not following the future anymore. You're helping create it. You're accessing something deeper than logic, tapping into the quantum field every time you follow a feeling, a flash of insight, a pull you can't quite explain. That's what they called the convergence. It wasn't theory or myth. It was real, and that's exactly why they shut down Project Looking Glass. Not because it failed, because it worked too well. It showed them something terrifying, not explosions or invasions, but a future where control no longer worked, where hierarchies dissolved, where humans stopped needing permission to think, to believe, to know. Consciousness was evolving, outgrowing their tools. The old structures, governments, surveillance, secrecy, they all crumbled in the future the machine showed. They tried everything, dismantled the device, scattered the documents, silenced the technicians, but they missed the most important part. The real machine was never the rings, the humming chambers, or the exotic particles. The real mechanism was awareness. The people were the technology, the ones who operated it, who synced their minds with it. That was the interface. And awareness can't be buried. You can't classify consciousness. You can't blacklist intuition. So if you've been dreaming about things that haven't happened yet, if time sometimes stutters like a skipped heartbeat, if you just know things without knowing how, then maybe you're already part of it, because the machine didn't predict an end. It foresaw you. right here, right now. Someone who lived in the margins of black-budget operations, speaking finally to people who were ready, who could feel truth vibrate beneath the surface of everyday noise. People like you, reading this or hearing this and recognizing it, not with the mind, but with something deeper. That's the bridge between the world that was and the one that's emerging, between division and connection, between control and awareness. This isn't coming. It's already here. The only question is whether you'll step into it. Welcome to the future. Welcome home. Tonight's story is called Project Selene, a quiet thriller about dusty archives, forgotten tapes, and the unsettling possibility that the most iconic moment in modern history might be a lie. We'll follow a man named Nolan Price, not a hero, not a spy, just a film technician, quiet, detail-obsessed. He doesn't chase conspiracies, they stumble into him. His job? Restore some old NASA footage, simple, harmless, routine, until it isn't. The story begins in a sun-bleached corner of Houston, outside a derelict warehouse from the Cold War era. The pavement is cracked, the air heavy with the scent of dust and heat. Nolan stands staring at a steel door, holding a printed letter from Arcadia Aerospace Solutions, a defense contractor turned private space archiver. The letter was formal, vague. We've uncovered NASA film reels believed lost. We request your expertise in restoration. Urgent archival priority, compensation, negotiable. What it didn't say was why he was chosen, or why they were offering nearly double his standard rate. Nolan didn't ask questions. Not yet. He folded the letter and tucked it into his back pocket. His fingers hovered over the keypad on the door. 5 digits. He punched in the code they sent, 1969. The lock clicked. Inside, the warehouse was stale, air thick with mildew and paper rot. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, revealing metal racks stacked with dust-caked boxes, most of them unmarked. It felt more like a tomb than an archive. In the far corner, tucked under a faded tarp, was a single box marked Project Selene, scrawled in faded Sharpie. No date, no agency stamp, just that word. He lifted the lid. Inside were reels, 16mm film, brittle with age. Each reel labelled only with numbers and timestamps. One had a sticky note attached, "Do not duplicate." He blinked. A nervous laugh escaped him. Too late for that, he muttered. He packed the box carefully and hauled it to his van, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling in his chest. Not dread, not yet. Just the sense of crossing a line, the kind you don't, or come back from. Later that night, Nolan sat in his cramped studio apartment, the hum of the film scanner echoing like a heartbeat. Frame by frame, he digitized the footage, watching as grainy black and white images flickered to life. At first, it was standard, astronauts in suits, control room chatter, countdown clocks. But then, things got strange, a repeated take. Then another, then another. The same scene, an astronaut descending a ladder, stepping onto a surface that looked like the moon, was filmed from 3 angles. In each take, someone off-screen called out, "Reset, go again." Nolan paused the scanner. He leaned in, rewound. The dust kicked up didn't float, it scattered. The shadows didn't match. The stars, missing. He stared at the screen, heart thudding. This can't be. But it was there, again and again. A set, a script, a director, hidden in plain sight. And then, late into the night, something even stranger. A voice on the audio track whispered, "You weren't supposed to see this." He froze. Had someone layered that in later? Was it a prank? A mistake? He played it again and again. "Stop watching." His breath caught. The scanner jammed. The power flickered. and outside his window, a black SUV idling under the streetlight. He shut the blinds. This wasn't about film anymore. It was about control and the truth that someone, somewhere, had buried deep enough to be forgotten. Until now. Obsession bloomed in Nolan's mind, like a virus. He stopped answering calls. He stopped sleeping. Each reel uncovered more. Artificial lighting reflected in visors, set blueprints tucked behind cue cards, handwritten notes that hinted at a staged lunar narrative, perfectly timed, to capture the world's imagination during a time of political unrest. Had we ever really gone to the moon, or had we just believed we had? The line between fact and hoax blurred until Nolan couldn't see it anymore, but one thing was clear. Someone had gone to incredible lengths to hide something, and now they knew he'd found it. So tonight, as you settle in, whether in bed, in a chair, headphones on, breathe slow. Listen for the whisper of old reels, the soft whir of magnetic tape. Let your mind slip into the shadows between frames, the spaces where truth hides in flickers, because what follows might not be fiction, not entirely. Let's begin. A lone security guard in a faded, dust-covered uniform stepped out from the shadows of a rusting gate as Nolan pulled up. Without asking questions or checking his ID, the guard gave a curt nod and waved him in, like he'd been expecting him all along. That only deepened Nolan's unease. The interior of the facility smelled like forgotten decades, stale air thick with mildew, decaying film stock, and the distinct papery scent of rotting cardboard. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead like nervous ticks, casting a sickly yellow glow over endless shelves of NASA-labeled boxes. Many were torn open, stained by water damage, or slashed down the sides. It looked less like an archive, and more like the aftermath of a storm. He'd heard about NASA's notorious record-keeping, tapes of rocket tests lost, telemetry data from the Apollo missions mysteriously missing, voice recordings partially erased. But this felt different. This wasn't chaos. It was secrecy. A sharp voice broke through the silence. "Mr. Price." He turned to see a short, meticulously dressed woman in a grey suit. Her heels clicked crisply against the concrete floor as she approached. "Madison Harlow," she said, offering a brisk handshake. "Arcadia Liaison. Let's keep this quick. No warm-up, no small talk." She gestured for him to follow, leading him past the clutter and deeper into the facility, where she opened a side door to a room that looked hastily thrown together. A makeshift editing suite. A dusty 60mm projector sat crooked on a rickety table next to a spool rewinder, some digital capture hardware, and a tangle of mismatched cables. Stacks of reels lined the wall, labeled with uneven handwriting. Apollo 11 Raw, Apollo 12, Avia Saturn, telemetry hole, and one with odd markings. Celine RSB footage. Harlow gestured toward the reels. "Your task is simple," she said. "Digitize these in high resolution. Flag anything unusual, visual degradation, sync issues, anything that stands out. But no commentary, no copies, and no uploads. Understood?" Her tone was flat but firm, her eyes scanning his for resistance. Nolan nodded. "Got it. I'll keep it quiet." He'd done non-disclosure gigs before, usually for corporate PR edits or unfinished prototype films. They always acted like it was national security. It never was. She handed him a small pass key and a laminated alarm code. "Access is limited. You'll be here alone. We want this wrapped fast. There's a schedule." And just like that, she turned and left, heels echoing down the corridor. Over the next 3 days, Nolan worked alone in the dim suite, slowly feeding reels into the projector and scanning them through a specialized capture rig. Most of the footage was what he expected. NASA, archival material, rocket stages, technician briefings, suited astronauts posing for interviews. The colors were faded, audio hissed with age, but he found something oddly hypnotic about it all. The countdown, the roar of the boosters, the echo of ground control chatter through analog tape. These were history's brushstrokes, genuine, raw, imperfect. He took pride in preserving it. Then came the third day. That's when he noticed the label, Apollo 11 Stage B. Take 3, he blinked. Take 3, he muttered aloud. NASA didn't label mission reels like that. They used timeline markers. Mission days, not Hollywood terminology. Still, he shrugged and threaded the reel through the machine. The projector clicked to life. The screen lit up with a wide shot, grey terrain, scattered rocks, and what looked like 2 astronauts bouncing gently across a simulated moon's surface. Then, a voice, clearly off-screen, called out, "Positions," and "Action." Nolan sat forward, eyes narrowing. One of the astronauts stumbled, catching himself. A faint laugh came from someone nearby. Then another voice, sharp and irritated. "Cut! Cut! Reset." The reflections too bright on the visor. The screen went dark for a moment, then buzzed into static. His heart skipped. That wasn't mission footage. This was a set. He rewound the reel, slower this time. In the upper frame, he caught the glint of a lighting rig. Large, industrial grade. And in the far left corner, a boom mic, momentarily visible, held by a man crouching behind what was clearly a papier-mâché crater. He paused it, frozen. Could it be a training simulation? NASA did mock-ups, even recorded some for PR. But this? The reel was dated July 19th, 1969, the day before the public moonwalk broadcast. He digitized it, flagged it as anomaly, and moved on. But his thoughts kept circling. Why label it Take 3? Why the secrecy? Training reels were usually marked with location, crew names, and the word sim. This had none of that. That night in his motel room, Nolan lay on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, mentally replaying that voice. Cut. Reset. The tone hadn't been technical. It was directional, like a film set. The next morning, he returned early, compelled by a gnawing curiosity. He scanned the shelves and pulled down a battered metal canister marked, simply, Celine Binside, was a reel that started with a standard NASA color calibration pattern. Then, it abruptly cut to a behind-the-scenes scene. Men in suits gathered around what appeared to be a half-constructed lunar module. One man, in a white short-sleeved shirt, was reading from a binder. Lunar surface continuity. Camera feed approach. We need to make sure the horizon line matches the predicted lens angle. Another man, heavy set, thick glasses, nodded and replied, "We fake it right, or we fail. Understood?" Nolan's mouth went dry. The men weren't engineers. They looked like set designers. There were diagrams on the table, stage lighting, blueprints, marked camera positions. One phrase echoed in his head, spoken clearly on the audio. "We fake it right, or we fail." His hands trembled slightly as he rewound the reel and watched again. This wasn't for training. This wasn't for PR. This was planning. For deception. The tape rolled on, documenting their careful calibration of shadows and lighting angles. They discussed how to simulate 1/6 gravity by timing jumps and suspending wires off camera. One technician adjusted the edge of a false crater, muttering, "We can't let them see the drop-off from this angle. It'll kill the illusion." Nolan stepped back from the machine, shaken. This wasn't a rumor. It wasn't internet conspiracy fodder. It was film, uncut, undisguised, and somehow it had survived. As the reel ended, he looked down at the stack of unprocessed canisters still waiting. His hands were cold, his breathing shallow. He realized then, this wasn't about restoring film. It was about unearthing something they never intended anyone to find. The public was only supposed to see the broadcast from one carefully curated channel. Nolan sat frozen, heart thudding in his chest as he set the reel aside. His fingers trembled. What he'd just found, if it was real, wasn't just valuable. It was explosive. He'd stumbled on something that could shake the very foundation of modern history. What looked like evidence of a staged moon landing. He stared at the dusty film reel for a moment. trying to ground himself. This had to be a joke, a hoax, maybe staged years after the actual event. But the film stock, it was definitely old, authentic, mid-1960s vintage. The audio, too, had that unmistakable analog hiss of the era. He'd worked with enough archival material to know. Still, his mind reeled. NASA had always been dogged by conspiracy theories, claims that the moon landings were faked on a Hollywood set, suspicious photo anomalies, odd shadows, waving flags, but these were always brushed off by mainstream science. He'd never given them serious thought until now. But this wasn't a blog post or a grainy YouTube video. This was celluloid. He leaned closer, squinting at the faded marker scribbled on the side of another reel. PSH Kubrick Liaison. Kubrick? A chill ran down his spine. Could it mean Kubrick, as in Stanley Kubrick? The name wasn't spelled clearly, almost like someone had deliberately scrambled it. But the implication was enough. He'd heard the rumors over the years, late-night whispers that NASA had tapped Kubrick to shoot backup footage of the moon landing in case something went wrong. It had always sounded absurd, until now. His hands were clammy as he reached for the next reel. The label read, Moon Landing Studio Revan. His breath caught. That night, paranoia crept in like fog under a door. The facility, normally just dusty and quiet, felt different, like it was watching him. Every creak echoed louder than it should. Every row of shelves seemed to hide someone just out of sight. He kept glancing over his shoulder, unsure whether the flickering shadows were tricks of the flickering overhead lights or something more. He stashed the reels in a closet behind lock and key. His plan was clear. Digitize the suspicious footage, back it up, and then figure out what the hell to do next. When he returned to his workstation, his stomach dropped. The reel labeled Apollo 11 Stage B, Take 3, the one he'd left on the spool, was gone. His heart pounded. He tore through the desk drawers, opened cases, checked under the table. Nothing. In its place sat a different reel, neatly wound, labeled in shaky handwriting, Celine E. Do not watch. He stared at it, frozen. This wasn't random. Someone had swapped the reel. Someone knew what he'd found. The reel was either a threat or a trap. Every instinct told him not to play it. But curiosity is a strange beast, and fear sometimes invites foolishness. He threaded Celine E into the projector, the screen lit up with static. Then, a grainy image of an empty crater under a flickering sky. The audio crackled with a reversed whisper. This is not for you. Turn back. Then came flashes, seemingly random, of rockets launching, then stalling mid-air. A man's face appeared briefly, bathed in shadow. His mouth moved, but no sound came. His eyes were wide, almost pleading, more static. Then darkness. Nolan sat in stunned silence, heart hammering. That wasn't just some abandoned reel. That was a message, or a warning. He stared at the label again. Project Celine. A secret project? A cover operation? The name chilled him. Was it possible that what he had stumbled upon wasn't just an alternate take or a precautionary backup? What if the entire moon landing, everything the world believed, had been fabricated? He needed help. Someone who could verify the footage's authenticity. Someone who wouldn't dismiss him as a nut job. The name came quickly. Dr. Eliza Trent, a former NASA contractor turned aerospace historian, sharp, meticulous, known for her exhaustive research and her refusal to bend to political narratives. He closed up for the night, making sure the closet was locked. Then, he double-checked the front doors. The hum of the building's fluorescent lights suddenly felt threatening, like the facility itself was holding its breath. As he walked out, a whisper, faint, almost imagined, seemed to brush past his ear. We told them we went to the moon, and they believed. He shivered. If what he suspected was true, then someone had gone to terrifying lengths to bury it. and they weren't going to let the truth out easily. The next morning, Nolan found himself standing outside a modest brick building in downtown Houston. On the plaque beside the door, Dr. Eliza Trent, Aerospace Historical Consultancy. He took a deep breath, knocked, and entered. Dr. Trent was exactly as her online profile had suggested. Mid-50s, small, intense eyes behind thin glasses, sleeves, near rolled up, surrounded by stacks of documents and dusty memorabilia. He introduced himself using the alias he'd prepared, but she cut him off with a smirk. "You're the archivist who called yesterday, right? Said you had something urgent?" He nodded, heart pounding. "Yes. Look, I found something. I'm not even sure what I'm looking at." From inside his coat, he retrieved a small, encrypted thumb drive. Dr. Trent plugged it into her laptop and brought up the digitized clips. They watched in silence. The footage of the supposed lunar set flickered across the screen. Then snippets from Celine E. The reversed whispers, the man's mouth moving in the dark. Trent leaned forward, her brow furrowing. She paused on a frame and zoomed in. "The film grain's right," she murmured. "The degradation's consistent with 1960s processing. The patches on the suits, they match early prototype designs, not the final ones. And look here. This badge. This isn't in any known press kit." Nolan swallowed. "Is it real?" She leaned back, rubbing her temples. "If this is fake, it's damn good. But if it's real..." She trailed off, then looked at him sharply. "Where did you say you found this again?" He told her everything. The reels, the cryptic labeling, the missing spool, the reel left in its place. He mentioned the whispers, the paranoia, the overwhelming feeling that someone was watching. Dr. Trent's expression turned grave. "I've seen deepfakes, propaganda reels, even Cold War psyops. But this is different. I want to cross-check a few things. Stamps on the film stock, production codes, even the layering of the NASA logos. If this footage turns out to be authentic, it means..." She didn't finish the sentence. Because some things, when spoken aloud, become too real to ignore. "If you're telling the truth," Dr. Trent said slowly, voice low and even, "you're in danger." Nolan swallowed hard. He could feel the sweat behind his knees, his palms clammy despite the air conditioning in her cramped office. Papers rustled softly as she leaned forward. "People don't just vanish these reels for fun," she continued. "NASA has always maintained that all mission footage was archived. Some lost, sure, but nothing remotely like this." She tapped the laptop screen, where the grainy footage of a clearly staged moon set had frozen on a wide shot of an astronaut planting a flag. Only the shadows were all wrong, and the backdrop, a cheap matte painting, was unmistakable. "There were whispers among the old engineers," she added. "Back in the 80s, I heard rumors of a backup plan, something in case the live feed failed, but we never had hard proof." She paused and adjusted her glasses, eyes narrowing as she scanned through more frames Nolan had digitized. This might be it. Or it might be something even bigger. For the next few hours, they dissected the footage meticulously, a half-visible NASA mission patch tucked into the bottom of one frame, background voices calling out telemetry readings, altitudes that matched actual Apollo descent profiles. One segment even seemed to mirror the real-time dialogue from the mission logs, but with odd discrepancies in cadence and delivery, as if rehearsed. Then Dr. Trent froze the video on a particular figure. Tall, thin, in a black suit, barely lit in the corner of a shot. "I know that face," she whispered. Nolan looked at her. "Who is he?" "He shows up in a few group photos. NASA, 1967. No name. Never gave interviews. Never appeared in the press. Internal memos just listed him as media liaison. The rumors back then said he coordinated directly with a big Hollywood name, possibly Kubrick." Nolan rubbed his eyes. "Jesus," Trent offered a theory, carefully choosing her words. During the Cold War, the pressure was immense. Beating the Soviets to the moon wasn't just about science. It was about survival. If they thought the real mission had even a small chance of failure, it makes sense they'd prepare something, a fallback. But this, she nodded to the monitor, this isn't a contingency. It's a full simulation. If it's real, it changes everything. She sat back, visibly shaken. You need to be careful. Get more footage if you can, but stay off the radar. Don't call attention to yourself. That night, they agreed to reconvene after she cross-checked some of the footage against NASA's physical archives. But the next morning, when Nolan returned to the facility, everything had changed. The gates were locked. A renovation sign hung, loosely on the chain-link fence, the name Arcadia printed in small, bold font below it. Arcadia Harlow, his contact, was gone. No answer on her phone. Security outside said the project had been suspended indefinitely. No one was allowed. Nolan stood outside the fence, numb with fury. They were scrubbing the place clean, silencing the evidence. Back at his apartment, his hands trembled as he checked his backups. Thankfully, he'd duplicated the most important clips to several flash drives. But when he tried to send Dr. Trent an email with a few more files, an alert popped up. Delivery failed. File flagged. Suspicious content. Transmission blocked. His heart dropped. His system had been compromised. Someone was watching him. They were trying to contain it, but fate handed him a strange gift. While combing through older digitized reels, he stumbled on one he hadn't paid much attention to before. Unlabeled, scratchy, nearly falling apart. The footage showed a man in his 60s, sitting in a harshly lit corner, looking directly into the camera. The man shifted nervously, licking his lips. The audio was reversed, garbled. Nolan reversed the audio track. Project Selene was never meant to be seen, the man said in a raspy voice. We built illusions for a greater cause. He coughed, spat blood. Then, we lied, or we lost the war. He looked straight into the lens. I left the record, the real record, in the Saturn archives. Then, static swallowed the rest. Nolan paused the tape and stared, heart racing. The Saturn archives? Could that mean the archives, tied to the Saturn V rockets? Or was it code for something else, a hidden repository? Was this man Red Hand, the mythical original whistleblower, the archivist who tried to smuggle the truth out and vanished? He picked up his phone and called Dr. Trent again. She answered, but her voice was sharp, frantic. Nolan, someone broke into my office. They took everything, my microfilm copies, even my personal NASA memos. I saw two men in suits standing across the street earlier, watching me. I don't think this is just about footage anymore. Arcadia Aerospace is a front. I'm convinced of it. There's something deeper. Black ops. Nolan felt cold seep into his gut. We need to meet, in public, somewhere crowded. They agreed on a time and location, the downtown bus terminal. Cameras, people, open exits, a place where no one could disappear unnoticed. But the next day, she never showed. Her phone went dark. Calls went straight to voicemail. Later that night, news broke quietly. Two former NASA employees, both retired engineers, died within hours of each other. One a stroke, the other a sudden heart attack. Both had worked peripherally on Apollo-era tech. Neither had any known health issues. The news cycle brushed past it, barely a mention, but on a fringe conspiracy forum things lit up. Threads appeared overnight. Moon archivist missing. Spike in NASA retiree deaths. Project Selene is real. One anonymous user, named Apollo Truth, posted something cryptic. Look to LB7. The final broadcast is hidden. Nolan stared at the post for a long time. LB7. It had to be something from the tapes. Lunar Base 7? Or was it code? A stage name? A forgotten location? Wherever it was, Nolan knew one thing. This went deeper than even he feared. Nolan sifted through the digitized catalogue with tired eyes, the glow of the screen reflecting in his glasses. It took hours, but finally, a label caught his attention. El Dato, Footage Archive. His heart rate picked up. He clicked it open, and what he saw made the hair on the back of his neck rise. The footage was bizarre, off-angle shots of lunar rovers moving across clearly artificial crater sets. Some clips even showed camera rigs, stagehands, and half-built backdrops. One piece of paper, half visible in a frame, had a line scrawled in Sharpie. The audience sees only the final cut. In another clip, a man in a clean NASA blazer muttered to someone off camera, "We can't let them see the starfield difference. Keep it black." Nolan leaned back, cold sweat forming under his arms. It was real. The footage had been tampered with, possibly even staged. He wasn't just chasing a conspiracy theory anymore. He was holding pieces of it in his hands. The tension began to close in. Strange cars started parking across from his apartment, engines idling just a little too long. The building's old caretaker, Mr. Patel, knocked on his door one evening, eyes nervous. "Some men came by," Patel said. "Asked about you. Flashed government IDs, real quiet types." That was enough. Nolan didn't wait. He packed the digitized reels onto a portable drive, stuffed them with his battered laptop into an old suitcase, and boarded a night bus with no set destination. He needed to disappear. He had one lead. Dr. Trent, his contact, had once mentioned a decommissioned NASA telemetry station deep in the desert. It was barely documented, rumored to have stored backups of raw moon transmissions. If anything unedited still existed, real or fake, that's where it would be. The bus rumbled through the dark, and Nolan stared out the window, lost in thought, as the lights from passing towns flickered across his face. His mind spiraled. If they didn't land on the moon, what does that say about everything? Decades of science, global history, national pride. It would all be a lie. But maybe it wasn't that simple. Maybe the landings were real, but what the world saw was manufactured, polished, edited to perfection for Cold War optics. That too would be devastating. He leaned back, sleep creeping in. As he drifted, a voice echoed faintly in his ears, static-laced like an old broadcast. "We told them we were first. The Soviets believed we soared. Project Selene was the key to winning hearts, no matter the cost." His eyes snapped open, heart pounding. Was it a dream, a memory from the tapes, or something else entirely? The desert greeted him with brutal heat and wind as he stepped off the bus in the middle of nowhere. He slung the heavy duffel over his shoulder, each step kicking up dust. No ride, no signal, no one in sight. The road was cracked and empty. Hours passed under the relentless sun until he spotted it. A rusted sign, half buried in sand. Letters, barely legible. NASA Remote Telemetry Site 17. It looked long forgotten. Chain-link fencing stretched around a cluster of low, windowless buildings, topped with barbed wire. He walked the perimeter until he found a corner where the fence had loosened. With effort, he slipped through. The front door was locked, handle corroded but intact. He dug a crowbar from a nearby utility shed, its roof half caved in, and pried the door open with a grinding shriek of metal. Inside, the air was dead, thick with dust and silence. The scent was musty, dry, mechanical. He wandered through dark hallways until he found a generator room. A manual crank and some luck got a few emergency lights buzzing faintly to life. The control room took his breath away. Old consoles lined the walls, labeled with fading stickers. Apollo, Gemini, Deep Space, TLM. CRT monitors sat frozen in time. Dust covered everything like ash. But here it was, the place where signals were once received, tracked, and possibly altered. Then, something out of place. One steel door in the corner had modern locks, new, not rusted. And inside, once he forced it open, was a different world, a smaller lab, spotless by comparison. The air was cooler. Racks of modern servers hummed softly. A sleek terminal blinked, active, and pinned beside it, a yellowed note read, "Archive Celine, authorized access only." His hands trembled as he reached for the keyboard. "Bingo," Nolan muttered, breathless with excitement. He powered up the ancient terminal, its fans groaning to life. The screen glowed with a faint blue light. He pulled a cable from his duffel, connecting the terminal to his laptop. A login prompt blinked. Username, password. He tried the obvious first. Username, Celine password, Apollo 1969 access denied. He cursed under his breath, scanning the cluttered desk nearby. Amid scattered notes and brittle folders, a sticky note caught his eye. TQ-based Naraki, auth, scribbled in faded ink. His hands shook as he typed, username, TQ-base password, tranquility. 69. The screen flashed green. He was in. The directory tree sprawled. Open. Dozens of folders, cryptic labels, feeds, live stage, sim mix, broadcast, cut, outtakes, Celine archive, Trent comms. His eyes locked on the broadcast cut folder. One quick skim confirmed it. Heavily edited footage labeled Live Feed 1969. Beside it, simulation test reels, rovers on sound stages, camera slates, takes numbered in the dozens, directives like maintain horizon consistency and starfield to remain black. It was all here. His breath caught when he opened Trent comms. Inside, a single video file. He clicked. Dr. Eliza Trent, visibly shaken, sat beneath harsh interrogation lights. Two men in grey suits loomed over her. One barked questions. She spoke, through tears. "We can't let them keep lying," she pleaded. "People deserve to know." Static. The video ended. Nolan stared at the frozen frame. His gut twisted. They got to her, and now they'd come for him. He sprang into action. If he could push this data out, all of it, uncut tapes, Trent's video, before they arrived, it wouldn't matter what happened to him. The truth would be free. In the next room, he found it. An old satellite uplink terminal, covered in dust, but intact. Originally built for deep space transmissions. He prayed it still worked. The generator whirred as he rerouted power. The facilities, rooftop dish groaned into position. On the screen, frequency options lit up. Low Earth broadcast, civilian communications, random ham radio bands, legacy military channels. He selected them all. If he saturated enough bands, someone would hear. Enough people would see. He compiled the files. Raw footage of set pieces and lighting rigs. Outtakes with directors, giving line cues. Voice logs, where men muttered, "We never left Earth. We built illusions." The Trent video, her terrified voice begging for truth. His fingers hovered over the transmit key. He tapped it. The console buzzed. Upload. Progress. 0%. 10%. 20%. Then, a sound. Heavy footsteps, boots on concrete. They were here, flashlights cut through the hall. Nolan bolted the lab door and shoved a filing cabinet in front of it. Outside, muffled commands, metal clanged. Gunfire tore through the flimsy door. Wood splinters rained around him. 40%, 50%. He ducked behind the console, heart pounding. The whole lab shook with the pounding at the doors. The watchers must have cut the outer fence. 60%. He hit an emergency override, locking the outer metal gates. It might buy him a minute, maybe two. A round of bullets struck the console, sparks flying. He scrambled back, flaring up his last card, a flare gun he'd found in a rusted emergency box. He fired it toward the hallway. Blinding light filled the narrow corridor. The watchers scattered, shouting. Another volley of gunfire ripped through the equipment. 60%, 80%. The outer lab door exploded inward. Nolan dove as the first masked figure stepped in, rifle raised. "Stop this now," the man barked. "We'll kill you. No one else has to die." Nolan stood slowly, his voice shaking. "It's done. It's already out there." The masked man lunged for the console, yanking cords, but Nolan had redundancy in place. Backup relays routed the signal again. 90%. Kill the feed. Someone shouted. 5%. Another round of gunfire ripped through the lab. Monitors exploded. The console sparked. The masked man looked at him, furious. "Then we'll bury you." The muzzle of his rifle flashed. Nolan felt the impact before he heard it. An explosion of pain in his chest. He dropped to his knees, choking on blood. 100%. Transmission. Complete. A shrill tone rang from the terminal. A message blinked. Broadcast successful. All frequencies live. He collapsed to the ground as the watchers scrambled, shouting into radios, smashing the console. But it didn't matter. The feed was already gone. Out in the world, things began to change. On emergency radio bands, people heard whispers, real voices, old logs. TVs in rural towns glitched into strange footage. Astronauts stepping on foam craters. Under studio lights. Online forums lit up with torrent links. Uncut, undeniable evidence. A man coaching someone how to move in moon gravity. A producer clapping a slate marked Apollo 11, Scene 3C. On one frequency, Dr. Trent's face flickered across 1,000 screens, trembling as she whispered, "Please, remember this truth." The illusion shattered. At first, networks refused to air it. But as millions downloaded and reshared, the story surged. Government statements wavered. Press conferences stumbled. People who had once mocked conspiracy theorists sat in stunned silence. Nolan lay in the dust, vision dimming. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard one last thing. A voice from the old speakers, crackling like a Mao ghost. "We told them we were first. We had to be. We built the sky for them. But the truth always finds a way." And then, nothing. The world had changed, and Nolan Price, archivist, truth seeker, martyr, became a name they would never forget. The watchers stepped back from his limp body, their heavy boots thudding against the concrete as they disappeared into the shadows. He lay there, breath shallow, blood pooling beneath him. And in those final moments, a voice echoed in his mind. Dr. Eliza Trent's old reel, the one with the quiet, raspy narration of the archivist. "We told them we left Earth, but we never had to." Strangely, a sense of peace washed over him. Even in death, he felt he'd done something important. He had completed the mission. Maybe, just maybe, Dr. Trent would see the broadcast. Maybe she'd survive. Maybe the truth would finally matter. By sunrise, chaos had broken loose across the digital world. Every major social platform, encrypted app, streaming site, pirate forum, even underground radio broadcasts were flooded with the footage. Not clips, not stills, full, uncut reels. The world woke to it like a slap in the face. Grainy, dust-covered, sound stages, mock moon craters under rigging wires, the buzzing of studio lights overhead, camera crews adjusting lenses, booms hovering over actors in astronaut suits, NASA officials huddled beside men in Hollywood lanyards, planning angles, reviewing scripts. The audio caught everything. Cue the lunar step. No, bring in the reflector. Again. Make sure the flag waves this time. To some, it was betrayal, an unthinkable lie buried inside humanity's proudest moment. Others felt vindicated. They'd whispered suspicions for years. Now they had their proof. News networks scrambled to make sense of it. Was it real? Was it partial fabrication? Could the footage be genuine but from rehearsals? Did we go to the moon but broadcast fake scenes to the public? NASA denied everything. The White House issued a blanket statement. Forged, malicious, propaganda. But the footage was too specific. Mission numbers, call signs, private code phrases, all matched documented records, retired flight logs, engineering memos. Even the dialect of a long-dead technician matched audio from the Apollo archives. The media went into overdrive. Legacy outlets tried to piece together a timeline. If it was faked, was it a contingency plan? A fallback if the mission failed? Or was the entire Apollo broadcast, a global event watched by over 500 million people, just a scripted performance? A few former astronauts stepped forward, passionately denying the claims. But many key figures were already dead. Some refused. All interviews. Others had disappeared from public life entirely. Ironically, conspiracy forums became the new mainstream. Every person watching had something to lose and something to question. If they faked this, what else did they fake? Arcadia Aerospace, the obscure contractor that hired Nolan to digitize old NASA footage, was immediately thrust into the spotlight. Their public relations team issued a brief, stammering denial. We believed we were handling standard archival transfers, but insiders leaked documents. Arcadia wasn't just a NASA vendor. It had roots in classified military projects. Intelligence, circles, programs redacted into oblivion. Public fury boiled over. Protests broke out outside NASA headquarters. People held up cardboard signs reading, "We want the truth." Others were more personal. Photos of the moon landing next to the word lies. An elderly woman in Florida, once a school teacher who'd made her class watch the 1969 moonwalk live, cried on live television. "I believed in them. I taught my students to believe." And then Sarah Voss reappeared. She'd vanished for months, rumored to be on the run, from the watchers. Now, she emerged with a fire in her eyes and a manuscript in her hands. She published a scathing editorial, Project Selene, the greatest story never told. She laid it bare. Her collaboration with Nolan, the missing reels. The transmission Nolan died to release. She didn't mince words. He gave everything for the truth. He was a tragic hero, and he deserves more than silence. The world responded. Hashtags flooded the net. Project Selene. Moon hoax. Expose NASA. Candlelight vigils were held. People gathered in quiet, stunned solidarity. NASA pushed back hard. We categorically deny any staged mission. We're investigating a targeted disinformation campaign. But their wall of denial was cracking. A retired NASA engineer admitted to strange anomalies in the 69 broadcast trucks. A janitor from a defunct California film studio told a local paper she remembered seeing a big fake moon once, guarded by men with earpieces. And so the myth of perfect truth began to crumble. Somewhere in a bunker, if it even still existed, members of the original Project Selene watched it all unfold. Grey-haired now, some in wheelchairs, they debated their next move. Try one last cover-up? Or vanish like smoke in a storm? Some watchers disappeared that week. No word, no trace. Just vanishing footprints and empty black vans abandoned on forest roads. Had they moved on to new illusions? Or had they realized, at last, that the wave of truth couldn't be stopped? In the end, people were left to choose what to believe. Some clung to the hope that we did land on the moon, and the show was just a safety net. Others believed the whole Apollo program was a grand illusion, America's most brilliant cinematic lie. But no one looked at that footage without feeling something twist inside them, and no one, ever again, looked at the stars without wondering who was really watching. A portion of the population refused to believe the footage, brushing it off as a highly sophisticated deepfake. Online arguments grew toxic. Families split over it. Schools debated whether to even include the moon landing in their textbooks. Society teetered between awe and betrayal, unsure whether to continue revering NASA or to question everything the agency had ever claimed. Then, Dr. Eliza Trent surfaced, pale but composed. She gave a quiet interview from an undisclosed location. Her voice was steady, but you could see the weight behind her eyes. The data logs were real. "I saw them," she said, folding her hands in her lap. They documented the staging process in detail. But I also believe some real lunar missions did occur, just not the first one, not the one we celebrated. According to her, the deception hadn't started from pure malice. It was political, a product of Cold War desperation, a time when image meant survival and perception shaped reality. But, she added, the cost to public trust was something they could never undo. A year passed, but the fire didn't fade. If anything, it spread. Controversy raged on. The term Celine deception became both a best-selling book title and a trending hashtag. Historians debated it live on talk shows. The Smithsonian issued statements, cautiously acknowledging unusual gaps in the archival footage. Docudramas flooded streaming services. One starred a reimagined Nolan Price, played as a soft-spoken rebel, unraveling the lie from within. In another, Dr. Trent was cast as a haunted truth-bearer, forced into silence by shadowy agents. To conspiracy theorists, Nolan became a symbol, a martyr, the man who brought down the biggest illusion in modern history. But not everyone cheered. Some, space scientists, lifelong dreamers, worried aloud that the fallout would smother genuine progress. One NASA engineer tweeted, "We're trying to go to Mars, and now the world thinks the moon was a movie set. This could kill funding for a generation." Others agreed. If the public started to see all of space exploration as a lie, why would they support the future? Meanwhile, in a forgotten thrift store on the edge of a dusty Florida town, a rusted film canister sat between stacks of faded VHS tapes and antique kitchen appliances. The handwritten label was barely legible. Celine, Launch Rehearsal 5. A young woman flipping through old tapes for a retro movie night paused, spotting the NASA logo. Curious, she bought it for $1, thinking it might be a collectible. For weeks, it sat on her shelf, unwatched, collecting dust. Had she played it, she would have seen a single long take never meant for the public. An astronaut in full gear, stumbling beneath glaring studio lights. He pulls off his helmet, sweat dripping from his hairline. "Jesus, it's hot in here," he mutters, rubbing his eyes. A production assistant off-screen curses. The label on the can, faint but still visible, read, "For final illusions, keep locked. Just another forgotten piece of a larger puzzle, lost to time, or maybe waiting for the next curious soul to press play." And as the mystery deepened, rumors swirled. Some claimed Nolan Price hadn't died. A fisherman off the Gulf Coast said he gave a ride to a man with sunken eyes, carrying a canvas bag full of film spools. The man spoke little, but handed him a sealed envelope with a short note. "Thank you for not asking questions." A small-time blogger posted that she'd received an anonymous email after defending Project Celine's whistleblowers. It simply read, "Truth matters. Keep going. N." But no one could confirm anything. No photos. No official sightings. If Nolan had survived, he had become a ghost, drifting through the wreckage of the very illusion he helped destroy. Project Celine was no longer hush-hush. It had become legend, a cold, unsettling reminder that illusions, when held up long enough, can define entire generations. They can build pride, shape identity, unify a country. But once unmasked, those same illusions can hollow out the soul of a society. What had once inspired, now mocked. What had once been sacred now felt staged. And in that silence, people began to look up at the moon differently. Not with wonder, but with doubt. Was it really touched by human feet? Or was that shimmering disk just another mirror, reflecting back our ambition, our fear, and our capacity to lie when the stakes were high enough? The search for the real story became a kind of obsession, a need, not just for answers, but for something solid, something honest, the messy, unpolished truth. Project Celine remained the darkest footnote in the history of space exploration, a conspiracy so deeply embedded that even the denials felt choreographed. In that final echo, maybe it's the voice from one of those forgotten NASA reels that speaks the loudest. We told them it was a giant leap for mankind. In truth, it was a single step, into the shadows. And then, as if to begin again, the screen fades to black. A new story creeps in. X73. A quiet voice breaks the silence. Over the next 30 minutes, you'll meet Agent Silas Rock, Dr. Liana Sesh, and Director Vance Haler, three people caught in a web of secrets surrounding a deadly pathogen. A headline scrolls past. Mysterious respiratory illness detected in Port Maxwell. At first, no one cared. Buried beneath the usual political noise, it barely made local news. But within days, similar reports popped up across the country. A dry cough, tight chest, hospitals quietly filling. Then, everything changed. The illness, later labelled VX73, was no ordinary flu. Victims declined fast. Within hours, breathing became labour. In days, cities locked down, schools shuttered, storefronts boarded up, military trucks rolled into empty streets under the guise of temporary emergency protocols. Panic rose, fear became currency. And just like that, another story began, one equally laced with secrecy, misinformation, and the gnawing question, was this real? Or another illusion? Agent Silas Rock, 42, had grown used to the routine. Crisp black suit, bulletproof vest underneath, standard issue respirator mask strapped tight against his face, irritating his skin. For over 10 years, he'd been the Bureau of Federal Integrity's man for crises, financial sabotage, espionage, bio-threats. He followed orders, checked boxes, and never looked too deep. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this. Whole neighborhoods were falling silent overnight. No sirens, no traffic, just rows of empty homes and streets swallowed in a kind of eerie, obedient quiet. He moved through the BFI headquarters like a ghost, shoulders squared, gaze sharp, even if the weight in his chest was growing heavier by the day. The halls were lit with cold fluorescent lights, humming faintly above. Walls were lined with corkboards plastered in bulletins, some new, some outdated, and curling at the edges. Digital monitors flickered with grim stats, infection rates, projected fatalities, new red zones where the virus, VX73, had erupted uncontrollably. Every 30 minutes, a pre-recorded woman's voice echoed through the overhead PA. Stay indoors. Maintain social distancing. All citizens must comply with National Stabilization Bureau guidelines. The NSB, National Stabilization Bureau, had been created in the panic's early days. A sweeping consolidation of federal power meant to manage the crisis. Director Vance Haler ran it. His image was everywhere. Stern eyes, pressed suit, clipped words delivered in a tone that left no room for doubt. Silas had met Haler once or twice in passing. Enough to read the man. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't greedy. He was something worse. Absolutely convinced he was right. Haler carried the intensity of someone who believed the future of the nation rested entirely on his shoulders. And when Haler spoke of the Unity Serum, the vaccine everyone hoped might end this nightmare, there was almost a religious fire in his eyes. Silas tried to ignore his unease. He was loyal, trained to follow the mission, not question it. If the serum stopped VX73, then that was the goal. End of story. But then came the briefing. It was early, just past 7. He was summoned without explanation to a small windowless room buried in the BFI's lower levels. Inside, a few senior agents and analysts sat hunched over laptops. No coffee, no idle chatter, just tension. A man he barely knew, Deputy Director Lane, spoke first. "There's a surge in online disinformation," he said, tone clipped. "Claims that VX73 isn't natural, that it was made in a lab." Silas frowned. "And you want me to track down the source?" Lane nodded. "Internal breach is possible. We need to shut it down before it spreads further." At first, it seemed straightforward. Misinformation in a crisis could be deadly. People panicked, rebelled, stopped cooperating. His job was to protect national stability. Sometimes that meant silencing lies before they became movements. But as Silas dug deeper, scanning logs, tracing message boards, filtering through the encrypted layers of fringe forums. He found something he hadn't expected. A file, unencrypted, titled plainly, Project Paragon, Preliminary. It shouldn't have been there. It wasn't stored on any of the standard servers. Someone had hidden it beneath layers of archived security reports, tucked into a directory chain almost no one would notice. Silas hesitated, then opened it. The document was clinical, stripped of emotion. It referenced VX-73, but with timestamps, dating months before the first known outbreak. One line stood out like a knife to the gut: field tests scheduled in controlled urban sectors. Monitor subject compliance and social response. His stomach tightened. He kept reading. More files followed. Connections emerged. Names of a private biotech firm contracted by the Department of Defense. Budget memos. Phase reports. Emails with redacted names. Everything pointed to one conclusion. Someone had tested VX-73 long before it ever hit the news. Then came another twist. Financial documents tying major pharmaceutical giants to the project. Companies that now supplied vaccines, test kits, biometric scanners. Silas sat back in his chair, breathing shallow behind the mask, staring at the screen. If this was real, then everything, every press briefing, every televised assurance, every vaccination push was a performance built on half-truths, or worse. Still, he wasn't ready to believe it all. Maybe it was disinfo about the disinfo. A digital landmine meant to trap someone just like him. But he couldn't shake the dread. He copied the files to a flash drive, encrypted them, and slid it into a hidden pocket inside his boot. Over the next few days, he worked quietly, triple-checking everything. He used proxy servers to trace funding trails, bounced through VPNs to verify metadata. Each layer he peeled back only deepened the pit in his gut. Then he noticed something unsettling. BFI's internal channels had lit up. Security logs flagged irregular access patterns. There were whispers of a breach, low-level chatter, but growing. His name hadn't come up yet, but he knew how fast that could change. Someone else was looking for this. Someone else knew. He hadn't been expecting her name, Dr. Liana Suresh. It came up in passing, buried in a list of personnel, associated with Cerulean Labs, a biotech facility he'd barely heard of, but there it was. Suresh, virologist, formerly employed, now scrubbed from most official databases. What little he could find tied her to early antigen research and something far more disturbing: compliance metrics. Silas frowned, rereading. The line, VX-73 antigen trial, shows 62% compliance rate. Additional modifications required. Compliance? Not efficacy. Not immunity. Compliance. Since when did vaccine trials measure how obedient people became? The document was dated nearly a year before the first reported case of VX-73. His skin crawled. He leaned back from his laptop, rubbing his face, heart pounding. This wasn't just theoretical anymore. If what he'd found was legitimate, then the virus had been engineered, deployed deliberately, and the so-called vaccine. Maybe it wasn't only a vaccine. His thoughts spiraled, dark, paranoid. Ideas he used to dismiss as conspiracy nonsense began to fit together like puzzle pieces. A virus used to justify total surveillance. A serum developed to do more than cure. Could it be used to control? Silas forced himself to breathe deeply. Imagination was dangerous. What he had were breadcrumbs, not proof. He needed more. That night, he left the bureau later than usual, the flash drive tucked inside a hidden pocket sewn into the lining of his coat. He kept his eyes forward, his pace steady, though every instinct screamed that someone was watching. Outside, the city was hollow. Buildings towered in silence, windows darkened, signs of life erased. The main avenues were empty except for military patrol trucks rumbling slowly past intersections. Overhead, surveillance drones buzzed in predictable circuits, their searchlights sweeping through alleyways and building fronts. Digital billboards glowed across rooftops and freeway signs, displaying one message in white block text against black. Unity Serum, your key to tomorrow. At a street corner, Silas ducked into a cracked, graffiti-covered payphone booth, one of the last still standing. He fed coins in, dialed a number from memory. 3 rings, then a voice. "Yeah? I need a favor," Silas said quietly. "Firewall access, deep pull, no logs." There was a pause on the other end. A breath. "You in trouble?" "Not yet. Just digging." Another pause, then, "All right, I'll help. No questions." But Silas heard it, the caution in his friend's voice. Everyone was on edge. The rules were shifting. Nobody knew who was on which side anymore. In this new world, silence wasn't just caution. It was survival. He hung up and stepped back into the cold night. The streets pulsed with uneasy quiet. Storefronts shuttered. Neon signs blinked weakly in empty windows. A thick tension hung, in the air like smoke. He found himself staring again at a billboard. That same phrase, Unity Serum. It was everywhere, omnipresent, as if willing itself into public consciousness. And then a thought, cold and sharp, struck him. What if the narrative had been fake from the very start? What if the virus wasn't a tragic accident of nature, but a calculated move? What if the vaccine was a delivery mechanism for something else entirely? A sudden gust of wind tugged at his coat, and for a moment he felt exposed. At the next intersection, a drone swept overhead. Its spotlight landed square on him. He stopped walking, raised his chin, and held still. A soft beep. The drone scanned his face. Another beep, then the light shifted and the drone moved on. No alert. He swallowed hard and moved toward the metro entrance, trying not to let the tremble in his fingers show. The station was nearly empty. A flickering overhead light buzzed as he descended the stairs. Graffiti covered the walls. The silence was deafening. He had stumbled onto something monstrous. He could feel it in his bones. For years, he'd followed orders, believed in the system, believed that, even if the work was dirty, it was necessary. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure who the enemy was. Maybe it wasn't the virus at all. Maybe it was the intent behind it. City by city, VX-73 tore through the population. Once bustling downtowns became barren, locked under tight military control. Armored vehicles rolled down streets that used to host farmers' markets and buskers. The curfews weren't just recommendations, they were law. Violate them and you were dragged to containment camps, supposedly for quarantine, though few ever came back out. News anchors smiled grimly through the screens, repeating the same story. The virus is relentless. The only hope is compliance. The only solution is the Unity Serum. Director Haylor was everywhere. Every TV screen, every press conference. He stood stiff, arms folded behind him, his voice calm, reassuring, deadly. "Over 90% effective," he said of the serum, a miracle of modern science. But then came the fine print. Refuse the serum? You lost access to your bank account. No trains, no buses, no ID, no housing, no rights. Within a few short weeks, those who resisted became ghosts. They scavenged for food, bought stolen supplies on the black market, hid in burned-out buildings, far from the reach of drones and scanners. Silas kept up appearances. Each day he wore his badge, walked the bureau's halls, nodded at supervisors, processed compliance reports. But each night he returned to that flash drive, Project Paragon, and every night the truth unraveled a little more. Encrypted documents revealed chilling possibilities. The Unity Serum wasn't just a cure, hidden in its molecular structure, delivered by microscopic carriers, was something else. One internal memo laid it out in cold detail. Nano-emitter module targets limbic regions. Neurological regulation markers confirm sedation of aggression. increased docility, cognitive modulation, pending further trials. Silas read the words over and over, heart hammering. The vaccine didn't just calm the virus, it calmed people, shaped their minds, made them obedient. This wasn't public health. This was psychological warfare on a civilian population. And Silas Rock, federal agent, career loyalist, was now faced with a decision he never imagined. Stay silent, follow orders, and become complicit, or expose the truth, knowing full well what it might cost him. Silas felt sick to his stomach as he read the files again, each word sinking like lead into his gut. Was it possible? Had the government used a public health emergency to secretly release a mind-altering agent on a national scale? The thought made his skin crawl. He needed answers, and fast. He contacted Dr. Liana Suresh over a secure, encrypted line. She was the scientist named in the files, an expert in virology who had once worked with a classified outfit called Cerulean Labs. Her replies came in brief, cautious bursts, coded and distant. She didn't trust him. Could he blame her? After days of tense, deliberate communication, she finally agreed to meet. The location: an old, abandoned warehouse near the docks, a place long forgotten by the city. Silas got there early, 30 minutes ahead. He kept his hood up, eyes constantly scanning the fog-shrouded streets for any signs of surveillance. No drones above, no unusual cars parked nearby. Just the low hum of the wind and the distant clang of waves hitting rusted cargo hulls. A street lamp above him buzzed and flickered, casting long, nervous shadows across the pavement. The air stank of sea salt, oil and rust. Then, from the gloom, a figure emerged, slender, deliberate. She wore a long, hooded jacket, the lower half of her face hidden by a faded surgical mask. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, but guarded, haunted. She stopped a few feet away, one hand tucked into her coat. Silas guessed it was resting on a taser or pepper spray, maybe something worse. Without greeting, she spoke, voice low and tight. "Why should I believe you're not one of them?" Silas didn't flinch. "Because I'm risking everything to find the truth." He reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. "I have the files. I've read them. VX73, the antigen trials, the compliance markers." He spoke fast but quietly, rattling off details from the documents with a kind of breathless urgency. Her eyes narrowed, tracking his every word. Then her shoulders loosened just slightly. The suspicion in her gaze didn't disappear, but it changed. She saw that he knew, really knew. "I worked on VX73, she admitted, her voice like broken glass wrapped in cloth. "I was part of the first phase design team. They said it was to prepare us for future outbreaks, a preventative system, something to strengthen. National security," she paused, her breath visible in the cold air. "We engineered it to bind to specific alveolar receptors, genetic markers that made it selectively aggressive. But no one on the team was told the full scope." Silas's mouth went dry. "You're saying they planned to release it?" Liana nodded slowly. "It wasn't an accident. It was deployed." A chill crawled up Silas's spine. "And the vaccine? Is it true what people are saying, that it changes how people think?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering away. Then, with a shaky inhale, she spoke. "It's not mind control." "Not exactly. Think of it more like behavioral conditioning. It lowers resistance, makes people more agreeable, more willing to accept authority. It dampens critical thinking over time, makes the population easier to steer." Silas looked down at the ground, then back at her, stunned. "You mean it turns people into, what, docile citizens?" She gave a sad, bitter smile. "Obedient ones." For a moment, neither of them spoke. A rat scurried across a cracked stretch of concrete nearby, its tiny feet tapping against broken glass. The world felt too still, too quiet. Liana reached into her bag and handed him a battered thumb drive. "My original research. before the redactions. It proves VX-73's synthetic origin and shows the behavioral compliance vector they built into the so-called cure. He took it gently, like it might explode. "If they catch me with this, you won't get a trial," she said flatly. "You'll just disappear." Silas stared at her. Her voice was too calm, too sure. He realized she'd seen it happen before. From somewhere out on the water, a foghorn moaned. The moment stretched long and taut. They both knew it wasn't safe to linger. No goodbyes, just a nod, and then they were gone, slipping back into the night from opposite directions. Back. At the Bureau of Federal Inquiry, Silas wore his mask well. During the day, he was the model agent, focused, loyal, precise. But by night, he became something else entirely. A ghost moving through classified networks, digging deeper, piecing together the horrifying puzzle the world refused to see. Outside, the city changed. The capital had grown quieter, more controlled. Drones zipped through the skies after curfew, scanning rooftops and alleyways with piercing floodlights. Public loudspeakers repeated mantras on loop. Stay safe. Stay indoors. Trust the cure. Propaganda was relentless, bleeding into every corner of daily life. Even the ads had changed, subtly nudging viewers to support the National Security Bureau's rising influence. Social media platforms were sterilized. Dissenting posts vanished within seconds, flagged as harmful misinformation. Accounts disappeared overnight, their owners unreachable. Those who complied, those who wore their immunity passes proudly, were allowed a version of normal. Restaurants reopened for the vaccinated. Stores resumed business, but only for those with scannable proof of submission. Yet something in the air felt off. People smiled less, talked softer. Questions died in their throats. Silas noticed it everywhere, in the too easy acceptance, the lack of outrage, the soft fog of mental surrender settling over society. Director Vance Haler stood at the center of it all, hailed as the savior of the nation. Every news anchor parroted the same line. He saved millions, stabilized the markets, restored order. No one mentioned the profits that poured into government-aligned pharmaceutical companies. No one dared bring up the modifications to the Unity serum quietly pushed through emergency legislation. Silas did. Silas remembered everything, and he knew this was only the beginning. Silas could no longer mask the turmoil tightening in his chest. Every hallway at the bureau felt like a stage. Colleagues passed him with plastic smiles, reciting lines about Halor's unshakable leadership, as if they'd memorized them. But it was their eyes that unsettled him most. Too calm, too clear, as if their anxiety had been quietly erased. Was it the serum? He decided to test the theory. In the break room, he casually leaned toward a co-worker named Rock, someone he'd known for years. "Ever wonder," Silas asked quietly, "why the lockdown went into full swing before the outbreak even peaked?" Rock paused mid-sip of his protein shake. For a moment, a strange fog seemed to pass through his expression. Then he blinked and shrugged, smiling blankly. "Doesn't matter. They keep us safe." He walked away without a second thought, and Silas felt the chill of confirmation run down his spine. This wasn't just compliance. It was sedation. Mental, emotional, maybe even spiritual. Haler's plan was working. The X-73 had created the perfect storm, a manufactured crisis to justify mass surveillance, public obedience, and a serum that dampened resistance at a biological level. The BFI, Silas now realized, wasn't just a passive witness. It was part of the machine. Whether knowingly or not, they were helping to bury the truth. He sat at his desk, heart pounding. He could play it safe, say nothing, look the other way, or he could do the unthinkable, expose everything. He knew what that would mean. That night, when he returned to his apartment, something was waiting, A sealed envelope slipped beneath the door. No return address, no markings. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a blocky, generic font. "This is bigger than you think. They see all." Beneath the message, near the bottom edge, was a symbol, a circle, with a diagonal line through it, like a zero crossed out. Silas froze. He'd seen it once, deep in a restricted BFI file. It had been linked to an underground network, a resistance movement that most agents thought was just a conspiracy theory whispered between late-night intel teams. But if they were real, and if they were reaching out to him, it meant they believed he might be an ally. His pulse quickened. This was real. The walls were closing in. He paced his apartment, tension twisting in his gut. His loyalty to the Bureau, his own conscience, the creeping horror of what was unfolding, it was all colliding inside him like tectonic plates. After a few deep, shaky breaths, he sat down and powered on his laptop. A notification pinged in his BFI inbox. New assignment, target, suspected subversive. Known for smuggling unauthorized medical supplies. Possible ties to anti-unity factions. Extreme caution advised. He clicked open the profile. The suspect's name made his blood run cold. It had been mentioned in Dr. Liana Suresh's unredacted notes. A contact, possibly even a whistleblower. Silas stared at the screen, realization, crashing into him like a wave. They were watching, testing him. The Bureau was starting to connect the dots, and soon they might brand him a traitor. He closed the laptop with trembling hands. Outside, storm clouds rolled over the city skyline, reflecting the angry red glow of surveillance lights. The air smelled like electricity and wet concrete. If he waited much longer, it would be too late, for him, and maybe for everyone else. The seeds of control had already taken root, and they were growing deeper by the day. Later that week, Silas stood on a crumbling overpass at the edge of the Glendale containment zone. Officially, it was labelled a public health quarantine perimeter. In reality, it was a dumping ground for the unvaccinated, families who had resisted the serum, some with children too young to consent. Their homes were decaying shells, their streets flooded with sewage runoff and static-filled warnings blaring from mounted loudspeakers. Unity patrols moved through the ruins in pairs, their visors glowing, their scanners constantly sweeping. Every so often, they pulled someone aside, a mother clutching a toddler, a coughing elder, and ran invasive checks to confirm vaccination status. Anyone who failed was tagged, or worse. Silas watched from behind the dark tint of his unmarked vehicle, his fists clenched tight. These weren't criminals. They were victims of a system that had decided fear was the fastest route to obedience. He thought of the envelope, of the symbol, of the choice he had already made, silently, in his gut. He reached out through a secure, anonymized channel using a burn account and layers of encryption. The message was simple: ready to talk, need help. The reply came within minutes. Midnight, Ash and Ink Printworks. Ask for Sparrow. Come alone. The print shop had been boarded, up for years. Rumour said it used to distribute underground newspapers before everything went digital, and heavily censored. Silas arrived early, weaving through alleys, changing his route twice, scanning for drones. He wore a dark hooded coat and a high-grade respirator mask. His ID chip was disabled. If the Bureau was tracking him, they'd have to work for it. The building was quiet. The windows were sealed with plywood. The door creaked on old hinges. Inside, the smell of ink and mildew clung to every surface. Stacks of yellowed paper sat untouched beside broken printing presses. It felt like a time capsule, and a warning. A figure stepped out from the shadows, short, wrapped in layers of black clothing, face mostly hidden behind a scarf. "You're late," the voice said, calm, but firm. "I had to shake a drone," Silas replied, exhaling slowly. The figure, Sparrow, nodded and motioned him to. Follow. They moved through a side hallway to a cramped back room, barely lit by a single hanging bulb. There, seated around a battered folding table, were half a dozen others. They wore patched jackets, mismatched boots, eyes sharp and wary. On the table sat a dusty old laptop, connected to a tangle of wires and a gas-powered generator humming softly. One by one, they introduced themselves using only code names: Rook, Nightshade, Sahara, a medtech, a freelance coder, a field journalist. Each one had walked away from something: a job, a family, a lie, and joined the fight. As Silas took his seat, a weight lifted from his chest. For the first time in months, he wasn't pretending. He was exactly where he needed to be. "I have proof," Silas said quietly, placing a worn folder and a flash drive on the scratched wooden table. His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes were firm. "Dr. Liana Suresh's files. This is her original research. The virus was engineered, and the vaccine. It's not just for immunity, it's modifying behavior." The room fell dead silent. Dust hung in the air like suspended ash, and the old ceiling fan groaned overhead, spinning lazily. No one moved. Sparrow, seated at the end of the table with arms crossed, finally broke the silence. "We've suspected as much. People have been reporting weird after effects for weeks. Mental fog, dull emotions, almost like they're losing the ability to care." Her voice was low and steady, but there was a flicker of fear behind her eyes. "We've even had former military sources tell us the NSB is pouring billions into surveillance upgrades. But we never had solid proof. Until now." All eyes turned to Silas. He slid the flash drive closer to the group. "This has Liana's unedited logs, her internal notes, everything she documented. There's also something else. A file labeled Project Paragon. It outlines the entire behavior alteration protocol." Rook, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually anxious twitch in his jaw, quickly connected the drive to an offline laptop. As the files loaded, the glow of the screen lit up the group's faces, revealing a mix of disbelief, anger, and dread. Lines of raw, unfiltered data scrolled across the screen. Graphs, trial logs, neural compliance charts. Sparrow leaned over, scanning rapidly. This is it. It's real." "We can't just dump this online," Rook said, pushing his glasses up. "They've got total lockdown on social media and news platforms. We post it, it'll be scrubbed in seconds. We need a broadcast they can't silence," Sparrow added. "Something old school. Nightshade, a quiet, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and sharp eyes, stood and tapped the map pinned to the wall. A red circle marked a spot deep in the Sierra Mountains. "This tower," he said, "decommissioned shortwave array, still has uplink potential. If we modify the hardware, we can piggyback off a dormant satellite, blast the files to hundreds of independent radio operators worldwide. Within minutes, they'll mirror it. We can't stop them from taking it down, but we can make it impossible to erase. It's off-grid," Sparrow said, "but crawling with patrols. We'll need you," she added, turning to Silas. "Your credentials, your knowledge of infiltration routes. We won't make it without you." Silas hesitated. He could feel the weight of it all. The sleepless nights poring over encrypted documents, the fear of being hunted, the guilt of staying silent for so long. But this was a chance to change everything. He nodded. "I'm in." The plan formed quickly, but with grim precision. Step 1. Find Dr. Liana Suresh. She was in hiding, but only she could speak to the data's credibility in a live transmission. Step 2. Slip through the surveillance net. The BFI had doubled down on tracking domestic threats, and Silas was now top of their list. Step 3. Travel cross-country using underground networks, switching cars and identities at each checkpoint, staying out of sight. Step 4. Reach the tower, override the remaining systems, and broadcast the files before the NSB could trace the signal. It sounded impossible, but the alternative was worse. a world lulled into docile obedience, mistaking submission for safety. Before dawn, Silas quietly exited the BFI facility one last time. He left nothing behind. No digital trace, no phone, no keepsakes, only a grey backpack with a pistol, spare ammo, forged IDs, basic medical supplies, protein bars, and an encrypted drive with the only existing copy of Lyanna's data. He met Sparrow's team in a shadowed alley behind a boarded-up auto shop. They climbed into a beat-up cargo van and headed west, sticking to back roads and forgotten routes. When they reached Lyanna's hideout, a cabin deep in the Oregon woods, they found her shaken. She looked thinner, her once dark curls now streaked with grey. "You came," she whispered when she saw Silas. "We don't have much time," he said. She nodded, her hands trembling. "One of my colleagues was found dead yesterday. Officially, it was vaccine complications, but I know it wasn't. He had doubts, like me." Silas glanced at Sparrow. "We need you to come with us. If we leak this without your voice, no one will believe it's real." Lyanna swallowed hard, then nodded. "All right, let's finish what we started." The journey was brutal. Every safe house was more precarious than the last. They slept in abandoned barns, crumbling motels, even inside a derelict train car one night. They changed cars constantly, black sedans, rusted pickups, even an old school bus at one point, each time wiping down every surface. The news was relentless. Silas's photo was everywhere, wanted for treason. Resistance members were vanishing. Every day brought another exposure incident. But they knew the truth. The government was quietly cleaning house, erasing anyone who knew too much. Then the worst happened. It was raining when they reached a narrow ravine in Nevada, slick mud and low clouds choking the sky. The van's headlights cut through the mist just enough to see the road ahead. Suddenly, gunfire exploded around them. The windshield shattered. Tires screamed as Sparrow swerved off the road. "Ambush!" someone yelled. Silas hit the ground, crawling through thick, cold mud. Beside him, Nightshade was already returning fire, but it was hopeless. Sahara was hit first. A scream, and then silence. Rook tried to run, but a burst from a drone-mounted rifle tore him down. Nightshade held the line for as long as he could, before collapsing beside the ravine, blood pouring from his side. Silas grabbed Lyanna's hand. "Move!" he yelled. Together with Sparrow, they ran. No gear, no van, nothing but what they had on them. They didn't stop until the sound of gunfire had faded into the storm. They didn't look back. The tower was still miles away, and the cost had already been too high. But the truth had to come out, before it was buried with the rest of them. Grief hit them like a freight train, raw, sudden, and unbearable. Silas, Sparrow, and Lyanna sat in stunned silence, huddled in the small wooden cabin tucked deep in the pines. Rain pattered steadily against the tin roof, a quiet metronome to their mourning. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and wood smoke. Blood-stained bandages lay discarded on the floor. No one had spoken for hours. Then Lyanna's voice broke the stillness. "They died believing in something real," she said softly, her eyes glassy. "Sahara, Nightshade, Rook. They gave their lives for this truth. We can't let their sacrifice be meaningless." Silas stared at the lantern flickering on the far wall, its dim glow casting long, ghost-like shadows across the cabin. He felt hollowed out. Their faces, Sahara's sharp grin, Rook's nervous energy, Nightshade's quiet strength, flashed behind his eyes like after-images burned into his memory. He wanted to collapse, to scream, to run, but none of those were options now. Outside, the wind howled through the pine trees like a chorus of lost souls. The forest seemed to mourn with them, its breath rattling the windows, its limbs creaking with grief. There was no turning back, no cavalry coming. Only one path remained. Press forward or surrender the world to a quiet, permanent sleepwalk under tyranny. When morning came, it brought with it a bitter cold and a dull grey sky. There was no sunrise, just a gradual brightening of gloom. Silas pulled on his coat, checking his gear with mechanical movements. Leanna tied her hair back and loaded their last few medical packs. Sparrow, silent as ever, holstered her weapon and nodded. This was it, the final push. They had just enough fuel, food, and adrenaline to make it to the Sierra Mountains. The old radio tower still stood, according to Leanna's maps. If they could, get there, breach the station, and override the analog systems, they might have a chance to transmit the unredacted Project Paragon files. Just a few minutes of broadcast could be enough to light the match, enough to shatter the illusion. But the NSB and the BFI weren't playing defense anymore. Back in DC, Director Vance Halor had flipped the switch on something called the Silence Protocol, an executive directive that legalized the use of lethal force against misinformation agents. Silas knew the language by heart now. They threaten national security. They undermine our unified response. They are dangerous to public safety. Bullshit, of course, but dangerous bullshit. That morning, using a hijacked satellite feed, Silas and the others watched Halor deliver a chilling address on every major channel. He stood at a podium under harsh fluorescent lights, flanked by NSB officials in matte black uniforms. "We are at war," Halor declared, "against a virus, both biological and ideological. We cannot allow a fringe group of radicals to destroy the trust we've built. The Silence Protocol exists for the safety of all citizens." Behind him, the NSB emblem loomed large, a stylized eagle clutching a syringe in one talon and a shield in the other. Silas snapped the screen shut, his jaw clenched. "He's going to paint us as terrorists." "We already are," Sparrow muttered. "In their story." So they left. Taking back roads and Forest Service trails, they travelled through desolate country. Small towns lay dark and boarded up with empty playgrounds and silent houses. In some places, people peeked out from behind curtains but quickly vanished from view. Fear had become their religion. Low-hanging clouds crept across the sky, and thunder murmured in the distance. It felt like even nature was waiting to see how this would end. Halfway to the tower, they ran into trouble. A checkpoint, unmanned but very much active. A mounted turret with a red sensor light scanned each approaching vehicle for transponder signals tied to vaccine IDs. Theirs, stolen from a junked delivery truck, had no such clearance. The turret locked on. "Move!" Sparrow shouted. "Right!" as bullets cracked through the windshield. Glass exploded inward. Silas threw open his door and dove into the dirt, dragging Leanna with him. The roar of gunfire was deafening. Shouts, the screech of torn metal, the hiss of a punctured radiator. Sparrow was hit, just a graze across her shoulder, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. They scrambled behind a rusted guardrail, breaths ragged, blood pounding in their ears. "I can disable it," Leanna gasped. "Cover me." She slipped around the edge of the road and ducked beneath the turret's firing arc. Fingers trembling, she cracked open the rusted circuit box and rewired it in under 30 seconds. The turret sparked violently and fell still, its barrel drooping. They didn't speak, just got up and kept moving. On foot now, silent, determined, hunted. By dusk, the trees thinned and the slope began to climb. And there it was, the tower. It jutted from the ridge like a rusted needle, silhouetted against the bruised sky, a once-forgotten relic from an older age of broadcast truth. Silas stared at it, heart pounding. The structure was still standing, still wired. It might just work, but they weren't alone. From their position behind a rocky outcrop, they saw the perimeter, chain-link fence, razor wire, mounted lights. Black SUVs were parked near the base. Several guards patrolled the area, their rifles slung across their chests. Surveillance drones buzzed in the sky like hornets. "This isn't abandoned," Silas muttered. "They knew we were coming," Sparrow said grimly, her voice low. She winced as she adjusted the bandage on her shoulder. They're ready for us. We walk away now. It's over, Liana whispered. Silas nodded slowly. Then we don't walk away. The three of them crouched behind the boulder, watching the guards planning their next move. Whatever happened next, success, death, or both, it would be written in that tower's shadow. We won't get another chance, Liana whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Her hands trembled as she checked the drive one last time, the faint glow of the tower ahead reflecting in her glasses. She swallowed hard. I can handle the tower's systems, but you two will need to keep them off my back. Silas nodded, jaw clenched. He could feel it, all the weight of what they'd lost, the friends who died to get them here. Sahara, Nightshade, Rook. Their faces flashed in his mind like ghosts. He chambered around into his sidearm with a click that echoed louder than it should have. Then let's finish this. They moved under the cover of darkness, slipping between the circling drones, scaling a rocky ledge that led to the rear of the fenced perimeter. Every breath felt like a countdown. Sparrow reached the fence first and snipped through the chain link with a pair of wire cutters, her hands steady despite the tension. As soon as the last strand fell away, a shrill alarm split the air like a knife. Red lights flared to life. Voices shouted in the distance. Flashlights swung wildly across the grounds. Go! Silas shouted. They sprinted for the tower's rear access door as bullets began to whine past them. The first volley cracked against the metal scaffold, sending sparks flying. Silas fired blindly over his shoulder, not to kill, just to force them down. A guard yelped and fell. Others ducked into cover. Sparrow hit the dirt and returned fire with cold precision. Liana dove beneath a halfway closed security shutter and rolled into the corridor. Inside, it was a tomb of flickering emergency, lights and ancient exposed wiring. She stumbled through the narrow hallway, heart pounding, until she reached the control room, an old panel blinking with dying lights and humming weakly with life. She jammed the flash drive into the terminal and began typing, fast and frantic. Her fingers flew over the keys, bypassing outdated firewalls and deactivating protocols. Lines of green code spilled across the screen. Back in the corridor, Sparrow held position at the doorway, gun raised. Come on, she muttered, her eyes scanning for shadows. Then it came, a sharp burst of gunfire from the hallway. A bullet slammed into the frame above her head, sending chips of concrete flying. Company! She barked. Silas appeared behind her, bleeding from a graze along his ribs. He slammed the door shut and kicked a broken chair beneath the handle, bracing it. Hurry, Liana! He gasped, clutching his side. I'm almost there, she said, not looking up. Transferring everything now. It's going out on shortwave. Ham, operators, encrypted relays, mirror protocols. They'll scatter this everywhere before they can scrub it. The speakers overhead hissed with static, the sound of signal strain. Then came the rising whine of full broadcast, a wall of digital data pouring out across frequencies. Suddenly, a deafening crash. Then, the door behind them exploded inward, splinters flying. Armed BFI agents stormed into the room, clad in black tactical gear, eyes hidden behind visors. Sparrow spun and fired twice, hitting the first man in the chest. Then she was tackled to the floor with a grunt, and through the smoke stepped Vance Halor himself. His immaculate suit didn't have a speck of dust. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked, straight onto Silas. There was no surprise in them, only bitter disappointment. Silas Rock, he said, almost gently. You should have stayed loyal. Silas tried to raise his weapon, but his arm was failing, blood soaked through his sleeve. Look at the chaos you've caused, Harla went on, stepping closer. All for a lie. You think you're saving them from fear. Fear is what keeps people safe. Fear binds society together. Without it, we have nothing but anarchy. Behind him, Liana gave a final cry. Transmission at 90%! She reached for the last keystroke, then a shot rang out. The bullet caught her square in the chest. She collapsed with a choking gasp, blood spreading across her shirt. Her body twitched, then went still. No! Silas roared. He raised his weapon again in blind rage, but a second bullet tore into his shoulder, spinning him to the floor. His vision blurred, the room tilted. Haler stood over him now, calm, dead-eyed. He pointed the pistol at Silas's head. "You really believed they deserved the truth?" he asked, almost with pity. What a dangerous idea. But across the room, something blinked. Transmission. Complete! Silas saw it, so did Halor. A crooked smile formed on Silas's lips, even as blood poured from his mouth. "It's done," he croaked. Soldiers wrestled him to the ground, pressing his face against the cold tile, muzzle against his skull. Darkness swallowed the edges of his vision. He could barely feel anything, just the cold and the weight of everything they'd lost. But somewhere in that haze, hope flickered. The truth was out, and then came the final shot. Silence. Morning broke over a fractured world, in cities around the globe. Strange files began flooding private inboxes, media hotlines, and public forums. Labeled Project Paragon, the documents were messy, raw, and horrifying. Blueprints for vaccine-linked neural compliance, internal memos between top officials, unredacted communications pointing to the VX-73 outbreak as a controlled event. For a few hours, the internet caught fire. Independent news stations picked up the files first. Then, citizen journalists began, cross-referencing. Some had archives that matched leaked data. The puzzle began forming in real time. Reddit threads surged, encrypted forums buzzed. Underground networks mirrored the files across thousands of servers. Public outcry followed, waves of anger, disbelief, and cold terror. Had they all been manipulated, drugged into compliance? What else had they been lied to about? But the government response was immediate and brutal. Official channels dismissed the leaks as AI-generated misinformation designed to erode public trust in vital health infrastructure. NSB representatives claimed the files were part of a foreign plot to destabilize the nation. Social media giants suppressed hashtags within minutes. Accounts were banned. News feeds scrubbed. But the seed had been planted. And somewhere, in the stillness of a quiet room, a ham radio operator in a mountain shack replayed the transmission. Then he forwarded it to 50 others, and they sent it to hundreds more. Truth, once spoken, does not easily die. Fact-checkers from major media outlets, many of them owned by the same conglomerates accused of complicity, flooded the airwaves with scathing pieces. They tore into the leaked files, questioning their validity, spinning the story as a desperate stunt by domestic terrorists. According to them, the real aim wasn't truth, but chaos. The National Security Bureau, NSB, quickly echoed the sentiment, labeling the broadcast a malicious attempt to erode public trust in the system's life-saving efforts. Director Vance Haler appeared on every screen in the country that evening. His expression was grave, his tone calm but stern. "Yes, the virus is real," he said, "and the vaccine remains humanity's only hope." His words were rehearsed, calculated. On some level, he wasn't lying. The virus existed. But truth had become a flexible tool, twisted to serve whatever purpose was needed. He pointed the blame at one man, Silas Rock. Individuals like Rock have hijacked this crisis to promote anti-government hysteria, Halor claimed. They seek to undo the progress we've made, to dismantle the safety we've built. Screens everywhere lit up with Silas's photo. The phrase, "He lied to protect you," in bold beneath his eyes. It was a masterstroke of propaganda, twisting his warning into betrayal, his evidence into treason. Within hours, every reference to Project Paragon vanished from mainstream platforms. Posts were deleted, accounts suspended, videos scrubbed. A single mantra echoed across the news. The NSB is the sole source of truth. Most of the public already anxious and dulled by the vaccine's subtle compliance effects, accepted the message without question. Dissenters were few and scattered. A few protests sparked in urban pockets but were quickly silenced. Drones patrolled the skies, dropping gas canisters that hissed across the asphalt, dispersing crowds before they could gather momentum. Still, in the quiet shadows of the dark web, people kept digging. Fringe forums traded fragments of the leaked files, the timeline, the names, the side effects. It all lined up too closely with what people had seen happening in their own lives. Some couldn't ignore it anymore. A few brave journalists, independent, underfunded, and constantly harassed, tried to share what they'd uncovered. They interviewed doctors who had treated patients suffering after taking the serum. Some recounted symptoms that had never been disclosed: flattened affect, disorientation, short-term memory degradation. But their live streams went dark within minutes. Their websites disappeared overnight. A wave of anonymous bots and official-looking flags labeled their content as misinformation. Some were arrested, others simply vanished. In a quiet cul-de-sac far from the chaos, a woman in a dark blazer stepped out of a black government vehicle. She wore a black armband and carried a sealed envelope. She walked up to the modest home and rang the bell. Silas Rock's sister answered. Her hands trembled as she accepted the letter. "We regret to inform you," the woman said, "your brother was killed in a shootout while attempting to sabotage protected infrastructure." There was no mention of Director Haylor being there when the final shot was fired. No explanation for Dr. Liana Suresh's body, found broken and bloodied nearby. The official story made no space for truth. The Bureau of Federal Integrity updated their files. Silas Rock, deceased. Status, domestic threat. And just like that, it was over. Life didn't pause to mourn him. The world spun on, driven by fear and fatigue. New virus mutations appeared. The vaccine was reformulated, rebranded. Unity Serum Plus. The name promised peace and safety. A new mandate required every child to receive the injection by their 5th birthday. Biometric scanners now tracked every move. You couldn't buy food, open a bank account, or enter a train station without a palm scan or retina check. Privacy had become folklore, a half-remembered luxury of a freer past. Still, the doubt refused to die. In dark corners of encrypted group chats, in basement gatherings, beneath flickering bulbs, people whispered. They remembered loved ones who had changed after the serum, who became quiet, passive, compliant. They recalled the fire in their eyes going dim. They spoke of Project Paragon and the chilling clarity of the files before everything was wiped clean. Had Silas and Dr. Suresh actually uncovered the biggest deception in modern history? Had they been silenced for it? In a small government-run school on the outskirts of a major city, a teacher stood in front of her masked students. Her voice was soft, soothing, almost robotic. "Order through unity," she said, tapping the touchscreen behind her. Safety through silence. The wall behind her displayed bright posters of clean cities, smiling families, and Director Haylor standing proud, arms crossed, against a digital rendering of the VX-73 virus. The emblem of the NSB glinted in the corner of every image. At the back of the classroom, a quiet boy named Elias tugged at the peeling edge of his desk, his eyes not on the screen, but on the shadows cast across the floor. He wasn't like the others. He didn't smile at the posters. He didn't echo the slogans. He listened, but he questioned. And in that flicker of doubt, in that tiny, unseen defiance, something dangerous still lived. Elias's gaze drifted from the teacher's screen to the back wall of the classroom, where an old, sun-faded poster hung by a single curled corner. It was barely noticeable, half peeled away, forgotten by time. On it was the face of a man, stern, shadowed, serious. Beneath his image, stenciled in bold letters, read, "He lied to protect you." The name at the bottom, nearly rubbed off, still clung to the paper like a whisper from another time. Silas Rock. Something about it tugged at Elias. He couldn't explain it. Not in words. Maybe it was the way the man's eyes seemed to cut through the condemnation plastered across his face. They didn't look like the eyes of a liar. Not angry, not desperate, just firm, determined, human. The teacher's voice droned on in the background, rehearsing the usual phrases. Silas Rock endangered public trust. He sowed confusion. He stood against unity. No questions, no nuance, just condemnation, repeated like a prayer. Outside the classroom window, a formation of drones glided silently across the sky, casting long, slow-moving shadows over the schoolyard. The world moved like that now, quiet, orderly, subdued. A blanket of manufactured peace pressed down on everything, muffling even the memory of disobedience. But Elias shifted in his seat, unsettled. At recess, while the others lined up in neat rows for their biometric scans, palms outstretched, wrists tagged, he slipped away, walking toward the edge of the playground. There was a small patch of grass there, half dead and brittle. He stood in it, letting the sun warm his face. For a brief moment, a breeze rolled across the yard, brushing through his hair like a whisper. A question floated with it. Who was Silas Rock? Really? Elias closed his eyes. He imagined a different world. One where people spoke openly, where the truth wasn't dangerous, where knowledge wasn't punished. He could almost see it. People gathering, not because they were told to, but because they cared. Voices raised, not silenced. Questions asked, not erased, but the moment passed. A safety officer's voice broke through the air. Elias, she called out, scanning the code on his wristband with a quiet beep. And just like that, the vision was gone. Hundreds of miles away, in the dim belly of a forgotten government archive, a plain cardboard box sat sealed on a shelf collecting dust. No one had touched it in years. Stamped faintly on the side, Silas Rock, evidence retained inside, among weathered documents and faded ID cards, was a small encrypted data drive, never opened, never examined. It held Rock's final thoughts, the proof no one wanted to acknowledge, test results, classified memos, and a confession, not of guilt, but of belief. A belief that the public had a right to know what VX-73 truly was, and what Unity Serum had become. And maybe, just maybe, that belief wasn't dead. Years later, deep in the mountains, in the dust-choked ruins of an abandoned radio station, a teenage boy pushed open a rusted door and stepped into silence. He'd been scavenging, looking for old tech, relics, anything salvageable. What he found instead was a wooden crate shoved into a back room, the words barely legible on its side, P. Files, SR. Inside lay an old laptop, its edges battered and keys missing. Next to it, a stack of handwritten notes, scribbled margins full of circles, arrows, and warnings. The boy, heart pounding, hooked the machine to a still-working generator. The screen blinked to life with a low hum. A single file waited on the desktop. Last. Record. Move. He clicked it. The screen flickered, then steadied. A face appeared, older than the posters, worn from exhaustion, but unmistakably the same man, Silas Rock. His eyes met the camera directly, as if seeing across time. His voice, quiet but firm, filled the room. I don't know if you'll ever see this, but if you are, it means you've gone looking. It means you're ready. He paused, taking a breath. They lied about VX-73. They lied about Unity Serum. We tried to stop it, not because we hated the government, but because we believed the people deserved the truth. This wasn't about curing a virus. It was about control. Every scan, every injection, every slogan, it was all part of something bigger. There was static for a moment. Then he leaned in closer. You were never supposed to find this. But now that you have, the question is, what will you do? The screen froze on his face, tired but resolute. The boy sat in silence, heart thudding. Outside, the wind moaned against the building. He looked down at the scribbled notes in his hands, then back at the glowing words on the crate, Project Paragon, and, in that moment, alone in a forgotten place, surrounded by dust and history, something lit inside him. A flicker, a beginning. He didn't know what came next, but he knew what came before wasn't the whole story. And now, maybe, it was his turn to decide what the truth was worth.